So I think we should start. It's 8:30.
Yep.
So I'm going to, well, we'll just leave the schedule up. So my name is Richard King. I am the current president of the MOU, and I am delighted to welcome everybody to the MOU Spring Birding Primer that is being done virtually for the first time, and actually, I think very successfully because of the number of people that are participating. We're delighted that you're participating with us. The new technology and the Zoom has allowed us to reach people that otherwise wouldn't have been able to easily get to the Carpenter Nature Center or elsewhere for these meetings. And we have many new participants. We have more than 300 people registered, and many of them are joining the MOU. So I'm delighted that all the new people that have joined, and I'm delighted of all the new people that have come on board for the Spring Primer. I want to thank specifically Jen Vey and Susan Barnes Elliott, who have helped organize, or have not helped, they have organized this whole program. This is just a wonderful way to start the spring, and the two of them have worked very hard to put this, get the speakers together to have everybody participate in this. So we're really delighted that Jen and Susan have done this, and I want to thank Tom Lewanski as the MC. He will be introducing the speakers and going forward from there. You know, we're coming out of a long pandemic. It's springtime. Migration has started. It's an exciting time to get out. It's good from my standpoint. It's really good for our health to get out. It's certainly good for our psyche to get out and go birding. And this is just an ideal way to get to launch our spring 2021 birding outings. The special welcome to all the new members that have joined. We're really delighted, and just a few basic questions or basic protocols for the whole morning. First of all, it's excuse me, it's important that when you come on, if you by chance are unmuted, at the bottom of the left of your screen, there's a little speaker and it says mute, a little microphone, and that should, if you hit on that, that'll put a red bar across it, and that should mute your sound, your background sound. And we have found that any background from any of the computers, including our own, except for the presenter, can interfere, particularly with some of the bird sounds and other sounds that we will hear with the presentations. So it's really helpful if everybody can just mute themselves and not carry on a peripheral conversation where all the rest of us can share it. So please mute yourself. At the bottom in the center, there's a little box called chat. And in the chat box, you can, when you hit on it, it'll open up a little space that you can type in a question. Tom, the MC, will be looking at the chat boxes for each presenter, and will ask the questions, forward the questions to the presenter at the end of their presentation. Each of the presenters have 30 minutes to present, so we try and keep on time. About 20 minutes for their presentation and 10 for Q&A. And we might not be able to get to all the questions. The end of the speaker, the end of each speaker, the presenter will have a contact information form so that you can contact them by email. We will try and keep on schedule, and this whole program is being recorded. Ben Douglas is going to help us get the recordings of all the presentations put on the MOU YouTube channel. And so sometime in a week or so, they will be available on YouTube, and they will be posted for a short period of time, some weeks, for people to watch. So we're delighted that all the people are here and all the new people are here. And welcome to the Spring Birding Primer for 2021, the Zoom Primer. And let's zoom on. So Tom, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thank you, Dick. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Lewanski, and I'd like to welcome you to the 4th Minnesota Ornithologists Union Spring Birding Primer. I have the honor to be your host this morning. Thank you, Dick, for going through kind of all the ground rules there. I think that'll be helpful. I thought I would start the morning by helping put us all in the right frame of mood by reading a short passage by Anthony DeMello. And hopefully this will stay with us throughout the day and as we go out birding and we're done here. A Buddhist master was walking with a disciple and accuses the master of hiding the secret of Zen from him. Just then a bird called from the riverside. The master asked, "Do you hear the bird?" "Yes," said the disciple. "Well, then you know I have hidden nothing from you." "Yes," said the disciple, and then he was enlightened. Our first presenter this morning is Alyssa DeRubeis, who grew up in Golden Valley, Minnesota. In 2013, Alyssa obtained a bachelor's in wildlife ecology from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. That Wisconsin word sticks in my craw all the time. Alyssa worked and volunteered in Alaska, Arkansas, Belize, South Dakota, Upper Midwest, and Quebec, surveying grassland and wetland birds, counting raptors, writing Wisconsin seasonal bird reports, and teaching children about ecology. Throughout her field experience, Alyssa's love for sparrows has grown immensely. That is why she has chosen this particular charismatic group of songbirds for her presentation this morning. Good morning, Alyssa. It's all yours.
All right, thanks for the intro, Tom. Let me share my screen. Okay. Right. And I think, oh, that is not the correct slide. Here we go. Okay, Tom or Dick, can you confirm that you can see and hear me okay?
You're good to go, Alyssa.
Good to go.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for having me. And let's start the morning off right with some sparrows. And yeah, they're as awesome as they are sneaky and frustrating sometimes, but hopefully we can break it down by species this morning. And just a fair warning, I will be going through the content pretty quickly because I'm stubborn and I wanted to cover as many sparrows in Minnesota as I could. And even then I'm still leaving out quite a few species. So let's just jump right into it. The family I'm focusing on today is family Passerellidae, formerly Emberizidae. So this is basically the New World sparrows. And it's a pretty large family, actually. It's almost 140 species, mostly in the New World. And North America, we have 43 of those on the regular, so pretty good in terms of diversity. Now, Minnesota has 20 that occur each year, and we have recorded a total of 27 with rarities over the years. And we have 5 what I consider to be Minnesota specialties. It's not that you can only find them in Minnesota, but I've noticed that people from other states will come to Minnesota, and that is one of their target birds will be one of these 5 sparrows. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Spizella genus. The American tree sparrow isn't in it anymore, but it used to be. So these are birds, these are actually the smallest sparrows in North America. And this group, the Spizella group, and they're great, they're pretty petite, they're gray, and they have a long tail that is forked. And absolutely no streaking, so that will quickly set it apart from quite a few sparrows in Minnesota. Something that's pretty characteristic of Spizella, including this American tree sparrow, is the red cap. Most of them have a red cap. And what's very classic for American tree sparrow that should set it apart from pretty much everything else is that bicolored bill. So it's black on top and yellow on the lower mandible. It also has a pretty obvious central breast spot, which is lacking in, I think, all the other birds in this genus. And notice that the throat is not very clearly marked. It's pretty plain, so it doesn't really stick out. And it has wing bars, as is typical with the rest of the birds in the Spizella group. I say that loosely because, again, tree sparrow is not technically in it anymore. Sad. These guys are pretty adaptable. You can find them in a variety of kind of field and shrubland habitat and up into the forest edge as well. Okay, and then what I'm showing you here is data from the MOU website. So this is actually stuff that you can go and explore on your own. But in Minnesota, they are not breeding birds, so they're just here fall through spring, and they're pretty widespread during migration, but they're restricted to the southern 2/3 of the state in the winter. So they're still here, and I would expect, according to data from the MOU, to see them through about May 8th in the south. That's the median departure date, and then they'll stick around until maybe May 12th in the north. All right, and this one is probably the most abundant of these Spizella sparrows. This is a chipping sparrow. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's got a pretty obvious red cap in the breeding season. In the non-breeding season, they can be a little trickier. The thing you want to look for is that eye line, and look if it extends from the eye to the beak. And if it does, that would be a chipping sparrow. It also has a little bit more obvious white throat, not quite as obvious as in a clay colored, but still pretty noticeable. In the breeding season, it's the only Spizella that has a dark bill. The chipping is very, very well adapted to suburban areas. That actually seems to be its niche. They like lawns with scattered planted spruce trees. You can also find them in pine forests. And in Minnesota, extremely abundant, extremely widespread spring through fall. We do get a couple individuals spending the winter, but pretty rare in the winter as well. And they've actually already started arriving in the south, and then in the north, we'll have to wait until about April 10th. Okay, clay colored. This one's one of my favorites, and it's a Minnesota specialty. They don't breed in that many US states, and I think it's like maybe 5 or so, and Minnesota is one of them. This one has a different body color plan. It's more of a tan gray and white versus the more like rufous on the chipping. And it's got a more strikingly patterned face as well. It's the only one in the breeding season of the Spizella that has a dark brown cap. In the breeding season, it can look a bit like chipping. So what you're going to look for is that eye line, and notice that it does not extend from the eye to the beak. So it has very pale lores, and it has a lighter gray nape, and it really stands out. And it also has a very nice little malar mustachial stripe in the breeding season, at least, and a pink bill. These guys are found in more rural areas. They like prairies with some scattered shrubs, at least in the breeding season, I should add. Now in Minnesota, they are also pretty widespread spring through fall, very rare in the winter. It looks like maybe we could get some more breeding records in the southern counties. These guys will not be arriving for a while, so we'll have to wait until April 21st in the south and April 27th in the north to see them. And then the last of the lot is the field sparrow, and what stands out to me right away is that very bright, thick white eye ring, and it gives it that very open-eyed appearance, a very cutesy look, if you will. And it also has the rufous cap and then the matching kind of rufous auricular or cheek patch. And it's evident on both the rufous adult, which is on the left, and then the gray adult, which is on the right, 2 different color phases. And it has a pink bill. This guy's found in pretty similar habitat to clay colored in the breeding season, but they generally like more shrub than prairie. In Minnesota, it's a little bit more restricted to the southern 2/3 of the state, but it is found spring through fall, so it breeds here, quite rare in the winter. And they will be arriving pretty soon, so April 2nd in the south. Okay, and then moving away from Spizella onto Vesper Sparrow. This is one of the large streaky sparrows. And like the field sparrow, it has a very obvious, conspicuous white eye ring. But if you can't see that, and if it's flying away from you, check out those, check out the tail spread, because those outer tail feathers are going to be white. So outer or white outer rectrices. It also has a white malar that I think it depends on the individual, but it seems to, it's white, it really stands out, and it kind of wraps around the cheek patch a little bit. And then it's got a pretty big pinkish bill. And some birds, you can just barely make it out, have a rufous patch on the wing. Vesper is a classic farmland bird, so you'll find them in agricultural areas, especially fields that have been abandoned, more disturbed grasslands, maybe with shorter vegetation. Bare ground is pretty important too for the Vesper. And in Minnesota, it is here spring through fall, so it nests here. Not as common in the northeastern quarter of the state though, and extremely rare in the winter. And as of today, today is our median arrival date in the south, and then in the north, it is April 12th. Okay, lark sparrow, this one is pretty charismatic, I think, and interesting that it hasn't, relatively speaking, been in Minnesota for that long. It's been expanding its range, in part due to the deforestation and clearing of land for farms. And this is a large unstreaked sparrow, so not many sparrows in that with that description. But I mean, guys, if you can see that harlequin, that awesome harlequin patterned head, you are good with the ID. So it's very distinctive. It's kind of this red, black, and white pattern on the face. And like the Vesper, when it flies away, it has those white outer rectrices, but it forms more of a necklace where it kind of touches the middle tail feathers as well. And it's got a huge central rest spot. So lark sparrows, they're found, I guess, kind of similar habitat to clay colored, so fields with scattered shrubs and trees. They do really like to have some barren ground. So gravel pits are good for that. Sandy prairies with like exposed sand, that can be good too. In Minnesota, they occupy a swath from the southeast corner all the way up into the northwest part of the state. And this is spring through fall. They're basically non-existent in the winter. And we'll have to wait a little longer to see the lark sparrow. In the south, they arrive around April 20th, and in the north around May 5th. Okay, Savannah, I think this one can be kind of tricky. To me, they look so similar to song sparrows, but there's a few things that we can notice. So yes, it's a medium-sized streaky sparrow, like the song sparrow. When it flies, it does have a more direct flight. It's not quite as undulating as a song sparrow. If you can see the yellow lures, you're golden. That's a Savannah sparrow, period. However, you'll notice the bird on the right doesn't really have those. So what else do you look for? You want to look for a forked tail. The song sparrow has a rounded tail. And the beak structure is a bit different too. It's a little bit thinner and longer and pink compared to a song sparrow. And the lateral throat stripe, it's that kind of brown triangle on the side of its throat. It's present in the Savannah sparrow, but it's not nearly as thick as it is in a song sparrow. So it's a bit thinner. And if you can make out the pink legs, it has pink legs. And the median crown stripe can be helpful too. It is a very light gray white, and it's a darker gray on the song sparrow. Savannah sparrows have done wonderfully with farmland, even though I guess they've still declined by like 52% in the past 60 years, according to breeding bird survey data. But you can still find them pretty readily in agricultural fields, pastures. When I did field work in Arkansas, they really like recently burned prairies. Minnesota, extremely common, extremely widespread, spring through the fall, and quite rare in the winter. And I think we could probably get some more breeding records of these guys too, according to that map. They'll be arriving pretty soon in the south, so March 31st is the median arrival date there, and then in the north, April 14th. Okay, and then moving on to my favorite genus. Well, these aren't all in the same genus anymore, but let's just pretend. The Ammodramus sparrows are medium-sized. They're very notoriously secretive. And they kind of have the build of a wren, where they have like a large head, a slightly smaller body, and then a short tail. The first of the four I'm covering today is the most widespread and common, and that's the grasshopper sparrow. Notice that it's really kind of buffy, buffy sandy colored overall, and there's no streaking, so that easily sets it apart from the others. If you can make them out, they do have yellow lures and a little yellow shoulder patch, not always very evident though. And it's pretty plainly marked on the throat, so not much contrast going on there. The nape is streaked. It's kind of a gray and light brown streaked pattern. Okay, and then the median crown stripe is white on the grasshopper sparrow. They're found in a variety of grasslands, I would say. They tend to lean towards drier prairies. You'll find them in hayfields, pastures, and the like. And in Minnesota, again, pretty widespread, although they're less common in the northeastern quarter of the state. And this is just spring through fall, and they're not here in the winter at all. And we could definitely use some more breeding records for this species. And as is typical for the Ammodramus sparrows, they don't arrive until a bit later. So in the south, grasshopper sparrow arrives around April 23rd. And then in the north, you have to wait until about May 3rd to start seeing them. Okay, Henslows. This one is, I guess, a celebrated sparrow in Minnesota. It's one of our specialties. The breeding range is restricted to the Midwest, and Minnesota is part of that, so people will come to see them here. It has a pretty distinctive color pattern. It's the only Ammodramus sparrow that has like a yellow olive head combined with a more like rufous brown back. And if you can make out the kind of white speckles on the mantle, those are present as well. It does have some streaking. It's kind of more spotty and crisp, I would say. And it does have a little ear patch right there. And the beak is big. It's probably the biggest of the Ammodrams compared to the body. And that median crown stripe is kind of a buffy yellow color. So Henslow sparrow is a bit more picky, selective with its habitat. It is in tall grass prairies, but it has to have a developed litter layer. So if this prairie has been burned, according to literature, anytime in the past like 3 years or so, you will not find Henslows there. In Minnesota, they are most abundant in the southeast corner of the state, but you can find them a little bit further west and north as well. And this is just spring through fall. We have no winter records, and we have, I think, only like 5, it looks like, county records for nesting. These guys will be arriving in the south around April 30th. Okay, and LeConte's, this is my favorite, probably one of my favorite birds ever, and I could spend all day talking about them, but I don't have that kind of time, unfortunately. But notice, okay, and it's a Minnesota specialty. It only nests, I think, like in 4 or 5 states in the US, and Minnesota is one of them. Notice that it has a very like light sandy orange color overall. So that's like I call that the body color plan, if you will. And the nape is kind of purplish. It's like gray and purple streaked. You can just barely make it out, but there is a white median crown stripe, I promise. It has a cheek patch. It's a light gray cheek patch though. And the throat is, it's white, so it contrasts a little bit with its orange head. These guys like sedge marshes and prairies and pastures, so generally wetter habitat on average. And in Minnesota, they are widespread during spring and fall migration, and in the breeding season, you'll have to go to the northern half of the state to see them. And LeConte's will not be arriving in the south until April 20th, and in the north, May 1st. Okay, and Nelson's, this is another very coveted Ammodramus sparrow. It's also a Minnesota specialty, so similar story to the LeConte's, where they, at least the interior subspecies of Nelson's, they only nest in a few states. And this is a darker, definitely a darker bird compared to the LeConte's. It even has a little bit of rufous on the back. And that cheek patch is a much darker gray. So again, just a darker appearance overall. And it has a light orange throat, so it doesn't really contrast as much as in the LeConte's. And it has an unstreaked and kind of bright purplish gray nape that contrasts with its body. And if you can make it out, it does have those white, at least in the interior subspecies, it has the white streaking on the mantle. And it's got, you can just barely make it out, but it does have a dark gray median crown stripe compared to the white of the LeConte's. These guys are found in pretty similar habitat in the breeding season to LeConte's, generally a little wetter, so more favoring wetland type habitats than prairies. And in Minnesota, this species is just less abundant on average than LeConte's, so even during migration, they're just much tougher to find. So that's why you're seeing a bunch of black dots there. And then the breeding season, you'll want to focus more so on the northwestern quarter to see them. This is the latest arriving sparrow, I think, in Minnesota. So in the south, they're not here until May 12th. That's like warbler time. And then in the north, May 22nd. Okay, and then moving out of the amodroms, we have the fox sparrow. And this one's pretty distinctive, so I won't spend a lot of time covering it, but it's a very large sparrow, and it's the only sparrow that has rufous, gray, and white. So there's no black, there's no brown, just those three colors really. And it also has a yellowish bill. And these guys like kind of brushy woodland edges, so a combination of shrubs and trees. And this is for the most part, an exclusively migratory species in Minnesota. So just spring and fall migration, no summer records, but we do have a small overwintering population. And these guys have already been arriving both in the south and in the north. Okay, now we're moving on to the Melospiza. So these are medium-sized sparrows with pretty long tails, and some are streaked, some are not. The song sparrow is the largest of the three. And notice I was talking about this earlier, but it has a very wide lateral throat stripe. And it's got a gray beak. And it's a little bit chunkier, I would say, than the other Melospiza species. And the rufous stands out on both on the wings and on the tail. It has pretty coarse streaking on a white belly, but beware that juvenile song sparrows are the streaking is a little different, and it can have more of a yellow wash. So just be mindful of when those guys are around later in the summer, and look for other features like the thicker bill and the more red on the back, and etc. These guys, where can't you find song sparrows is a better question. They're just about everywhere, any early successional habitat, typically by water. And they are super, super abundant and widespread in the state. And we even have a small overwintering population. And they have, they've already been arriving. So if you haven't seen your first of your song sparrow, keep your eyes out. When did I get mine in Montreal? I think last weekend I got my first year up here. Okay, and then Lincoln's looks kind of like the song sparrow, but I think a little fancier. Notice it has the much crisper streaking, and it's always going to have that buffy chest, upper chest, I should say. And it's got a little bit more like black flecking on the back. It's not quite as rufous as a song sparrow, a little bit more like sandy brown on average. And it has a pretty thin lateral throat stripe. And that beak is a little bit thinner and more elongate than on a song sparrow. And during migration, they're found in a variety of shrubby habitats. And during the breeding season, they're found in woody bogs. Okay, in Minnesota, you're most likely to find them during spring and fall migration, or if you want to go to mosquito land, you can go up to the northeast third of the state during the breeding season, and extremely rare in the winter. These guys will start arriving around April 11th in the south and April 21st in the north. Okay, and then we got the swamp sparrow. This one, just a fantastic looking bird, I think. And it's got that nice rufous cap and rufous back. The rufous cap is unique to the swamp sparrow in this genus. Also has a central breast spot and no streaking for adults, but there is a little bit of streaking on the juveniles. And it has a unstreaked nape, unlike the the song and the Lincolns. I think that swamp can resemble white-throated sparrow a bit. So what you'll want to look for, at least in the non-breeding season, what you want to look for is that the eye stripe. And if it does not touch the back of the head, then it's a swamp sparrow. And then another thing to focus on is the lack of white wing bars. White-throated sparrows have white wing bars. Swamp sparrows like marshes, so sedge marshes, cattail marshes, even swamps sometimes. In Minnesota, they are also very common and widespread spring through fall. And we have a few that, like maybe one or two that spend the winter each year. Not very common though in the winter. And they've already started arriving in the South as of, looks like March 22nd, and then not until April 14th in the North. Okay, now we're on to the last genus, I promise. These are the Zonotrichia, or yeah, Zonotrichia genus. So these are pretty large sparrows. They don't have any streaking, and they have kind of like a pot-bellied look. And the first of the three is a white-throated. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. They can be super, super abundant during migration. And you should be able to pick out in any plumage and any color phase that yellow, that bright yellow lure between the eye and the beak there. And the white throat is clearly delineated with a thin black line, hence the name. And it's kind of rufous, a little bit rufusy on the back. And it's has a gray beak. And actually that's the only Zonotrichia in Minnesota that has a gray beak. And yeah, they're found in a variety of habitats. Usually like to have some trees nearby. Forest edges are great places to find them. In Minnesota, there are, for the most part, here spring through fall. We do have quite a few that will spend the winter too, but not that many. And in the summer, they're in the northern half, I guess, more so the northeastern quarter. All right, and yeah, they've already been arriving, although it looks like the big peak isn't until, it doesn't start to really go up until about mid-April. So if you haven't seen any yet, don't worry, they're coming. Okay, and white-crowned sparrow kind of looks similar to white-throated. One thing you'll notice is that the white throat doesn't really stand out as much because it doesn't have that black border around it. And it's got a pinkish orange bill, really different from the white-throated sparrows. And you'll see the head pattern is slightly different. These guys prefer areas, I mean, you'll find them in the same areas as white-throated, but they tend to go away from trees. They prefer areas with few to no trees. This species is pretty much exclusively migratory. So spring and fall migration is the best time to see them. Very rare in the summer. We get, I guess, a couple that will spend the winter, but not that many. And these guys won't be arriving until April 21st in the South and April 26th in the North. Okay, and then the last one is the Harris's sparrow, which I would consider a Minnesota specialty because they have a very central range. So you won't find them on either of the coasts. So people get excited to come more inland to see these guys. Really, really flashy looking sparrows. Even in the non-breeding season, they will have the black crown that kind of, and a little bit of the black throat as well. They've got the only one that has like a gray cheek patch. And they do have a little bit of streaking, but it's a little bit more speckly. And they have a pink bill. And for juveniles, which is I think what we tend to get like first year birds in the winter, they have more of like a tawny colored head. So that can help separate them from the other Zonotrichia sparrows. And they're found in pretty similar habitat to white-crowned sparrow, so more so favoring shrubs and staying away from the trees a bit more. And in Minnesota, like the white-crowned, it's pretty much exclusively migratory. You will notice that, especially in the spring, it has a bias more so towards the western half of the state, so you'll find more up that way. very, very rare in the summer, and we do get a couple birds that spend the winter each year, but not many. And this map is weird because, or this graph rather, is weird because it says that the median arrival date is April 4th, but I don't know anyone who has seen one on April 4th, so I don't know if maybe that was a typo, but I mean, but you can see on the graph that, I mean, it's really the last week of April where they start to show up in numbers in the south, and then a little later in the north, of course. Okay, so I went through basically everything I have. I do have more slides I didn't feel like I had time to do. So if you have questions on rare sparrows, if you want more general genus descriptions, I can cover those too. And I didn't have time to cover dark-eyed junco and eastern towhee, which are the other two regular species in the state. And if I don't have time to answer your question today, there's my email. Feel free to shoot me a message. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alyssa. We have a few minutes. If anybody in the audience has any questions for her, go ahead and type them into the chat feature there on your computer. I'll wait a couple of minutes here if there's any questions that people have at this time for Alyssa.
Let's see. Should I start answering? Maybe there are some in here already.
What I'll do is if I see some, I will read them off so everybody has the benefit of hearing them. A lot of thanks. Thanks, Alyssa. I have no audio. Fantastic talk. Thank you, Alyssa. Oh, here's a question from Bobby. Oh, wait, no, going back to Tara. You may have said this already, but will you make your slides available for viewing later?
I actually didn't say that, and I don't know what the best way would be to do that. If that's, I mean, it might be, I guess because they're going to be recorded, you could pause at certain slides and look at them, but I don't know if there's a good way for me to share the PowerPoint. But I mean, I know Tara, I could send her a message privately if she wanted the PowerPoint.
Great. For people who are just coming on, we are recording this and will be put on YouTube. There was another question here. Let me see if I can find it. There's a bunch of them now here coming in.
I saw a couple, if we keep going in that order, one person requested to learn calls, and I actually did originally have that in my, like the first time I went through my presentation, and then I realized there is no way I could just focus on only calls and make that a 30-minute presentation. But yes, calls are really important, especially the songs are helpful. There's a bit more subtlety between the call notes, but yeah, definitely recommend. I will share a good place to look at sound recordings. I think it's .org, xenocanto.org. That's usually where I go.
Here, question from Bobby: is it common to mistake other species for sparrows?
Yeah, there can be quite a few things. Like I'm thinking right off the top of my head is red-winged blackbird. You can even just look at their behavior, and they're always going to walk with a little bit of a gait, whereas sparrows are always hopping. Like you'll never have one walking like a chicken, like the red-winged blackbird does. Same goes for stuff like American pipit and Lapland longspur, which I think can be pretty easily confused. And house sparrow, I mean, it has sparrow in the name, but it's technically in the weaver finch family, and they just have a huge beak. Although some sparrows do too, so that can be a little trickier to tell apart.
Thank you. One last one before we move on. Thanks from Nate. Any notable cases where calls distinguish better than appearance?
Well, honestly, sparrows can just be so furtive that if you only hear the call note, sometimes that can be fine, even if you can't see the darned thing because it's hiding in some vegetation. But yeah, so call note can be helpful. I'm trying to think which ones. Yeah, like tree sparrows have a pretty distinctive kind of jangly call note. It needs a bit of study though, I would say, like for things like the Melospiza, even the some of the Amadroma species. But yeah, so vocalizations are always good. So if you can get a recording and then maybe look online later, that's always a good idea.
Thank you. Associated with that, from Linda, repeat the site address you mentioned for Sparrow songs again, please.
It's called, and I actually put it in the chat too, which it might be hard to scroll through all the messages, but it's called Xeno Canto. So, and Xeno is with an X, so it's XENO hyphen CANOTO. CANOT. Yes, it's kind of a weird name. And you can look at all sorts of vocalizations. I mean, from all around the world.
Alyssa, thank you so much for your presentation this morning. In interest of time, I think we'll move on. Our next presenter is Ann Kessen, who is a lifelong birder who lives in Chisago County next to the Carlos Avery WMA. She's lucky. She has a PhD in biology with an emphasis in avian systematics. And for 13 years, she has taught biology at Century College in White Bear Lake. In the MOU, Ann is currently serving as a treasurer, as well as associate editor and seasonal report compiler. In spite of widespread disagreement, Ann thinks the best looking duck in Minnesota is the gadwall. I hope that doesn't cause too many arguments here today, but Ann, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It occurs to me that having told you my favorite duck in Minnesota, I've probably lost all credibility already right at the start. We're going to talk today about birds that are not going to improve any of our life lists. That's because the birds we're going to talk about are not members of species, but are rather combinations of species. We're going to talk about hybrids just because they're interesting birds, and also because it's spring, and spring is a really good time to discover hybrids. A couple of things we have to understand before we go on here. First, the definition we're using for hybridization. For our purposes today, hybridization is the production of offspring via reproduction involving a male and female belonging to two different species. The second thing to keep in mind is that what is driving reproduction is the urge to get genes into future generations. So birds don't want to just have offspring. They want to have offspring who will have offspring, who will have offspring, who will have offspring, and so on and so on. So not that birds are thinking about this, but this urge to get one's genes into future generations is the driving force behind reproduction and hybridization. We find hybrids when we look through, for instance, a flock of ducks, and we find one that looks different, doesn't really fit the description of any of the species that we know. Often, if we're lucky, the hybrid exhibits a combination of traits of the two parent species. So if we look here at this northern pintail hybrid, you can see that its breast color is kind of midway between white and this deep chestnut. We can see that the markings on the neck here extend, the white extends up the side of the neck, certainly more than in a mallard, where it doesn't extend up the side of the neck at all, but not nearly as much as on a northern pintail. We look at the head, and I don't know what you call this color, but it's something in between green and brown. So this is kind of the classic hybrid that we would look for, something that shows a combination of traits or an intermediate kind of trait. So how common is hybridization in birds? For a long time, it was thought that about 10% of bird species are known to have on at least one occasion had an individual who mated with a member of a different species. More recent work has suggested that as high as 16.4% of bird species have on occasion hybridized. Even though this is a lot more than 10%, this is probably still a gross underestimate. The reason is this. Ducks, they are distinctively plumaged. So you're scanning a flock of ducks, you can really pick out that hybrid in a group. But this hybrid is a male. What if the hybrid were a female? And it had traits that were intermediate between a female mallard and a female northern pintail. Well, intermediate between these two, you could certainly find it, but it wouldn't leap out at you. You wouldn't necessarily notice it so readily when you were looking at a bunch of ducks. Or consider birds that look very much alike. It could be that Empidonax flycatchers hybridize like crazy. But I wouldn't be able to find a hybrid. The problem with species that are very similar is that an intermediate individual, a hybrid, would have characters that are within the normal range of variation of either or both of the parent species. So it's probably really impossible to just visually identify a hybrid between two very, very similar species like these flycatchers. So what happens to these hybrids? What happens when two birds hybridize? Well, hybrid offspring might not be viable. They're just the embryos don't develop, the eggs don't hatch. Maybe the eggs hatch, but the chicks are just in bad shape, very weak, do not grow to fledging. Or another possibility is that hybrid offspring are perfectly healthy, just fine birds, but infertile. And that could apply to both sexes of the hybrids, or it could apply to only one sex. In birds, when only one sex of a hybrid group is infertile, usually we think it's the female sex. Another possibility is hybrid breakdown. If you are into horticulture, you grow plants, you may have heard of hybrid vigor. When plants hybridize, often the result is a more vigorous kind of a plant, but this is not how it works with animals. Hybrid breakdown is a situation in which the first generation of hybrids is healthy, vigorous, fertile, things look good. But then when they reproduce, the subsequent generation is sickly, less fertile. Subsequent generations may have more eggs in the nest that do not hatch. They may have smaller clutches. So ultimately, as we go down the generations from the original pair that hybridized, this whole line just kind of peters out. A fourth possibility for hybrid offspring is that they are viable, healthy, fertile, no hybrid breakdown. So this is the least likely of the outcomes for hybrid offspring. Also, I would point out that even if hybrid offspring are healthy, fertile, they have a plumage that's intermediate between the two parent species. And for species that use visual cues or looking for a striking pattern in their mate, other birds may not recognize these hybrids as potential mates. So that could inhibit their reproduction, even though they are perfectly fertile. So these are in general, the 4 outcomes, possible outcomes for a hybrid. I would point out that it's not just random which of these conditions the hybrid offspring has, but for any 2 specific species hybridizing, their offspring will have one of these results. So why does hybridization occur? I mean, obviously, let me go back. The chances of getting your genes into future generations are way reduced if you mate with someone who's of a different species. So why do it? Well, a researcher named Hub came up with this idea a long time ago. Hybridization is more likely when chances of finding a conspecific are low. This is called the desperation hypothesis, and that is a really good name for it because it is time to mate, and a bird is looking for a potential mate and can't find one. So it ends up mating with the next best thing. Bird is not thinking this, but this is how it works out. I should point out here that when we're talking about the formation of these hybrid pairs, often, I'll go so far as to say usually, we're talking about the female making a mistake. In most bird species, not all bird species, but in most bird species, the female chooses who she's going to mate with. The male does whatever he can to increase his chances of being chosen. So the female chooses a mate. So in most cases, when we have a hybrid pair, it is the female who has made an error. The likelihood of hybridization is greater when a species is rare in an area relative to another species. That's what the desperation hypothesis says. You're looking around for a mate, and there just aren't that many choices of your own species. So you end up with somebody else. Also, the likelihood is greater when both species share similar visual and/or acoustic cues. So species that are similar to each other visually in terms of sound or display, these are more likely to get involved in hybridization. So here's the picture. It is the breeding season. A female bird is coming into breeding condition. She is looking desperately for a mate, and she chooses the best she can find. She's not thinking this, but this is the driving force behind what's going on here. About hybridization. Now we're going to look at some images of hybrids that have been documented occurring in Minnesota. Now, I'll point out that some of these images are taken from the MOU website, and they are images, pictures that were taken of the actual hybrid individual that was found in Minnesota. And for these pictures, you'll see I have included the county, the month and the year, as well as the photographer. So this duck here having the bad hair day is a blue-winged teal, cinnamon teal hybrid. And you can see clearly it's intermediate between the two parent species. It has this rusty, or I suppose we should say cinnamon color to the head and body, but it has the speckling on the sides that we see in a blue-winged teal, and it has a hint of a facial crescent here. In many instances, when blue-winged teal hybridize with whatever other species they hybridize with, you often see some trace or even a full-blown facial crescent on male hybrids. Now, when blue-winged teal mate with cinnamon teal, we don't think that's entirely unexpected because they're in the same genus. They are very closely related. Here we have a hybrid between birds that are not in the same genus. So these are more distantly related birds, the northern shoveler and, I must say, the beautiful gadwall. Now, so here we can see this individual. You can see it has some rustiness on the side, reminiscent of a northern shoveler, and it has the classic black butt of a gadwall. But what about this facial pattern? We don't see that in either of these individuals. Well, I have selected pictures that show, for the most part, hybrids that are nice and intermediate between the two parent species, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes two species hybridize and the result you get is kind of wacky. Doesn't really look like either of the parent species. Now, this is a great picture. Now, you may be saying, this does not look like a great picture, Anne. If the ducks are not cooperating, it's a bad angle, but this picture shows two hybrids in a single photograph. So this is a mallard northern pintail hybrid. You can see that line along the side of the neck starting up here. And this is a mallard American black duck hybrid. And you can just make out here this kind of odd head pattern here. I'm going to give you a better picture. So this is a mallard American black duck hybrid. You can see the breast has some hint of this color from the mallard. It has the sharp demarcation between the head and the breast that we see in black ducks. And it has this peculiar head pattern. This kind of head pattern, some strange pattern on the head, is fairly common in mallard black duck hybrids. Mallards and black ducks violate one of the rules we said that existed about hybridization likelihood. We said hybridization is more likely when one species is a lot scarcer than the other species. But it turns out in the eastern part of North America, where American black ducks are much more common than they are here, for instance, just talking about one area, even when black duck numbers are pretty good, they're not scarce at all, plenty of black ducks, and of course there's always plenty of mallards, black ducks and mallards hybridize, even though there's no scarcity of black ducks. We're not sure why this occurs. They certainly are very closely related species, but this tendency to hybridize readily is a source of concern to wildlife managers because of a fear of introgression. Introgression, as it says here, it refers to the transfer of genetic material between species following hybridization and backcrossing with the parental species. So we have mallard black duck hybrids, they're breeding with each other, and they're breeding with the parent species. So they're breeding with mallards, they're breeding with black ducks. As this continues, eventually in a population, we reach a point at which, in this case, you don't have any black ducks that are pure black duck anymore. They all have some kind of mallard genes in them. This is happening to mallards too, but mallards have a much wider range than black ducks. As you know, mallards are very abundant duck. Black ducks have a more limited range. And so there is concern that if we have this hybridization and backcrossing continuing, eventually you're hard pressed to find a pure black duck. Okay, enough about waterfowl. Although I must mention, waterfowl are one of the groups of birds that are most likely to engage in hybridization. Not entirely sure why that's true. There's been a lot of speculation. Here's another non-waterfowl hybrid. This is interesting to me. So here we have a hybrid between a greater prairie chicken and a sharp-tailed grouse. You can see the tail is kind of intermediate in shape between the two. And the pinnae here, you see on these feathers that are erected at the back of the head here on this prairie chicken, quite large, largely non-existent on the sharp-tailed grouse. And so here on this hybrid, they're kind of intermediate, kind of little stubby pinnae sticking up here. This is interesting to me because, you know, these birds are lekking species. Lek, L-E-K is the word. Lekking species have a situation in which the males all get together in some nice level ground, and they all do their displays. And the females come and they walk around among the males and pick the one they like the best. And then they mate, and the female goes off and raises the kids, and the male stays where he is and, you know, tries to attract more females. There have been records, very rarely, of these two species occurring in the same lek. The question that comes to my mind is, so a female steps onto the lek to choose a mate. She sees a member of her own other species displaying, and she chooses the other guy. I don't know why that is a great mystery to me. It perhaps is a mystery to everyone. Here is a picture I love. This shows a hybrid family. So here we have a Clark's grebe paired with a Western grebe, and here are all their little hybrid kids. When these kids grow up and get their adult plumage, they're going to be hard to identify because you're going to be looking for something that is intermediate between these bill colors and this amount of black on the head and how dark the back is. So that could be a tricky identification. Here we have some songbirds. Alyssa will like this slide. Here we have a dark-eyed junco, white-throated sparrow hybrid. You can see juncos have this, as you know, white, sharply defined white lower breast and belly, and you can see this, a hint of this right here. We have, of course, the white throat on the white-throated sparrow. You can see that here, not quite as distinct. And you look at the bill colors, dark bill here, light bill here, and this bill looks like some combination of that. So, an interesting bird. Now, of course, we can't talk about hybrid birds in Minnesota without talking about golden-winged warblers and blue-winged warblers. These two species hybridize regularly in Minnesota. In days of yore, the blue-winged warbler wasn't in Minnesota. It's a more southerly bird whose range has been expanding northward into places like Minnesota. It has similar habitat requirements to the golden-winged warbler, not identical, but similar. And so where the two both occur in the same area, they hybridize regularly. This has caused some concern. Golden-winged warbler numbers are declining precipitously. And one concern is that blue-winged warblers are maybe contributing to the demise of the golden-winged warbler through introgression. Again, that hybridization and backcrossing, and eventually you don't have any pure golden-winged warblers left. On the other hand, it's good to note that even in areas where there are no blue-winged warblers, golden-winged warblers are declining precipitously. So we can't lay it all at the feet of blue-winged warblers. These birds hybridize so much that their hybrids have names of their own. This is a first-generation hybrid called a Brewster's warbler. And you can see the intermediate traits here. It has the yellow wing patch of a golden-winged warbler and the white underparts of the golden-winged warbler, but it lacks the black pattern. It has the plain face and throat of the blue-winged warbler. Hybrids of golden-winged and blue-winged warblers are healthy, fertile, and so we get a next generation of hybrids from this pairing. Brewster's warbler is the most common hybrid of these two that we see. The second most common that we see is Lawrence's warbler. There are a bunch of other combinations that might be viewed, but these are the two most common. Lawrence's warbler is a second generation hybrid. So this bird results from the mating of two Brewster's warblers or the mating of a Brewster's warbler with a golden-winged warbler. For those of you who enjoyed Mendelian inheritance in high school biology, this black face and throat pattern is the result of a recessive trait. There has been some recent work on golden-winged and blue-winged warblers, genetic work, that has suggested that they did some sequencing, and it suggests that golden-winged and blue-winged warblers are 99.97% genetically the same, which might cause you to say, but Anne, they look really different. Indeed, they do. It turns out that the 0.03% of genetic difference includes the genes for plumage, color, and pattern. So that's an interesting finding. There's still, of course, a ton that we don't understand about this system, the golden-winged, blue-winged warbler system. But they're interesting to see and comparatively easy to see. This is the last of these pictures that I'm going to show you, and I chose this simply because, like the first picture I showed you of the mallard pintail hybrid, this is one in which the hybrid is so perfectly in the middle between the two parent species. Rose-breasted grosbeak, black-headed grosbeak hybrid. Has the partial coloring of the black-headed grosbeak, but in the same pattern as a rose-breasted grosbeak. So all of these, this is not a picture that was taken in Minnesota, but this hybrid has occurred in Minnesota. So there we have it. We've looked at a bunch of hybrids simply because they're interesting to look at and because it's spring, perfect time to get out there and look at hybrids. So there is my contact information. If you have questions or want to talk about hybrids that you have known and loved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. I think we just have time for maybe a couple of questions here. I'm going to go back to the first one. Are there some traits that are sex-linked so you can tell by observation the sex of the species contributing to the hybrid?
Okay, so you're interested in knowing, if I'm interpreting this question correctly, you want to be able to look at the hybrid and say, oh, the mother was this and the father was this. Typically, that is not possible to do on visual inspection. It is possible if researchers take a blood sample and do some genetic analysis. That's very possible. In fact, I have a slide here that I discarded that shows a hybrid warbler that had its parentage identified in that way. So typically, when you look at them, no, you can't tell which parent was which. Long answer to a short question.
Thank you. And there's one, I think you answered this, but I'll throw it out anyway. Are hybrids sterile?
It depends. It depends on the two species that have mated. In some cases, in many cases, hybrid offspring are sterile. In other matches, the hybrid offspring infertile. When I was talking about this, infertile, sterile, I'm using interchangeably.
Great, thank you. If you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and get a hold of Dr. Kessen through her email address, and I think we will move on to our next presentation. Thank you. Ben Douglas is currently a member of the MOU Social Media Committee and the Awards Committee. Ben also volunteers at Carpenter Nature Center, helping them run the technology pieces of their Modus Tower, maybe Ben will get into that, and a number of bird watching events. In 2019, Ben visited every Minnesota county 3 times in a successful quest to notch over 10,000 county ticks in a single year. Take it away, Ben. Thank you.
All right, and Tom, I just wanted to validate on the calendar, it looked like there was some break time scheduled. Did we want to use that time, or are we just going to jump straight through mine and do that after?
Maybe one of the people more in the know than I can weigh in on that.
I don't know, Jen or Dick, if there was anything.
This is Dick. Ben, why don't you do your presentation and then we'll take a break.
That sounds good to me.
We do need a break.
Yeah.
Indeed. All right, so I'm standing between everybody and a break from a torrent of information, but I will do the best I can to keep everyone entertained or at least interested to some degree. So this could appear on the surface as a very dry subject or very dull subject, what you can learn in your yard and actually in your neighborhood. So the whole point of this was, on the heels of this pandemic we've been in, what can you get out of birding if you just can't get away from the house very much, or you can't go very far, or you're not willing to go very far, all of that kind of stuff. That was how the year was for me. And that's why I wanted my intro to say something about traveling all over the state. I spent an entire year while working full time, getting to every square inch of the state of Minnesota. And I actually learned almost as much from my yard and neighborhood this last year as I did during that. So let me see if I can get my screen to respond to me. There we go. So this isn't a yard flex. This is not me saying, hey, I've got an amazing yard, I should talk about it for a while with people. You'll see very shortly that that is actually the completely opposite. I have a very average run-of-the-mill metro yard. In this case, I've been in this location in Lake Elmo for 4 years now. It used to be a tilled cornfield, so it is not amazing habitat. I have 124 species identified literally from my yard. So I'm either standing in the yard or in the house looking out the windows on it. I've lived in Minnesota for 9 years now, and between a yard in Oakdale, which was a multi-unit location like townhomes that bordered on a swamp, and this location here, I've identified 162 species from those two locations. Neither was incredibly impressive, but when you extract every bit of quality out of your neighborhood and your yard that you can do some pretty amazing things as far as identifying species and learning things about kind of their machinations throughout the year. In my home and neighborhood right now, I have 163 species. So I include an area that is directly adjacent to my home that I can walk to and from in a short route before work or after work, whatever it might be in there. So just giving you a little bit of context of what this is covering in that space. And just so you know that I'm not lying, there's a few feeders here, but this is the backyard. So this is literally not good bird habitat. It is mowed yard, which is the absolute worst habitat possible for bird species. In it, you can see a line of youngish trees that were planted on this berm as a privacy screen from a street. And then just beyond that, you can see there is an open field across there, which used to be tilled field. It is basically fallow right now, waiting for building to be done. But that has provided some amazing opportunities kind of during that wait time in there. So we're going to talk about arrival dates, sky watching, the birding doldrums, so that time when everything seems quiet, the things you can learn during that time, microhabitat, so the smallest little parcels of land and what they can teach you, what they can show you about birds, eruptions, so specifically focusing on these fall finch eruptions, and then just other interesting happenings. So maybe those are a little bit of a yard flex or a little bit of a fun to show how exciting it can get when you're birding from home or in your own neighborhood. So you've seen a lot actually this morning already, and a lot of times on the Facebook pages of MOU and eBird and Audubon and others, you get a lot of information. You get a lot of dates and charts and stuff that say, here's the arrival dates for individual species and maybe their exit dates and things of that sort. And, you know, it helps to begin to frame up the year, but a lot of times that's just a ton of information. It can be really hard to, you know, keep that together in your mind of like what is happening throughout a year, when to actually expect a given bird. But what I've found is your home and your neighborhood actually provide the perfect test bed, the perfect training ground to get to know these machinations of the birds, to get to know the cycles of when they arrive on it. So this whole section is really about when do your birds arrive. So you see dates and stuff that say, well, the southern arrival date, so the southern half of the state, it's somewhere right around or just north of the metro is the southern half of the state. So if you're in that southern half, you know, and the date says something like March 26th or whatever, but what is your arrival date? What does your habitat or lack of habitat or whatever it might be actually show for those? And how do the seasons, better spring seasons like we've just had, and how do things like that, you know, change your situation? So here's a chart. You saw several of these from Alyssa in here. So this is a song sparrow. This is MOU data. So this is just showing when they're arriving, the absolute, you know, early point of when migrants are going to start moving, you know, beginning of March, but they don't get going for a while. This data here, though, is from eBird. So this is my data, and I've circled it at the top, Inwood Neighborhood, Lake Elmo Home. So you can create these out of your own data. It's actually automatically generated in certain situations on eBird. And what I see in this data is that as soon as this swings upward, the week of 3/22, so the third week of March, that is literally when my song sparrows show up. So this is me getting a view of the data. Now I've chosen in this case a frequency chart. So this shows me that on 40% of my list during the third week of March, I have song sparrow on those lists over the last 4 years that I've done this. And then eventually, within a week of that, nearly every list or the majority of my list will have song sparrow on them. So another fun thing that I did is I took the data that just kind of crept in the lower left corner here, and I've lined this up with the chart above. So if we take the last 3 years of data or 4 years of data, 2017 through 2020, what we see is that my arrival date is right at this specific point in March, the 3rd week. And that's when you start to get that first big upswing. So my normal arrival date in my neighborhood coincides with the really upsweeping movement. But and this is where the early spring comes in. We've had a really good March. It's actually almost a record high average temperature for March. So what has that done? Has that changed anything? And in fact, it does. From daily efforts that I put in from my own home and neighborhood, this year, I got a song sparrow 2 weeks earlier than I ever have at this location. And that puts it really early on this upswing. So we can see the direct impact of an exceedingly warm spring. All the snow melts off. We're starting to get open water much earlier than we expect to. And some of these near migrants and semi-overwintering birds move around a lot quicker and a lot sooner than they might otherwise. And that gives you an opportunity to, push your arrival date up much closer to the absolute early arrival dates on stuff. So just a way to see data and then actually test it in the field yourself for it. And just one, thing I want to share here, a yellow warbler is my best ever arrival. So within about 1,000 feet of my front door on one of my morning routes, I had a yellow warbler show up on 425. This gets flagged in eBird because it's fairly early. In fact, it is the earliest Washington County record of yellow warbler in MOU data history, and I believe also in eBird data history. So for this county in there, a random bird in just a random retention pond in my neighborhood happened to be the one that was the earliest by 4 days. So you can see really interesting, really cool things happening depending on the effort that you're putting into it. And you don't have to go to these ultra premium locations across the state. You can find it in your own neighborhood, in your own backyard on it. Jumping subjects, eyes on the sky. The one thing that does not require premium habitat is the sky. Now, there are definitely different grades of sky and quality depending on where you are on the flyway. The closer you are to one of the major riverways, the better. But by and large, keeping your eye on the sky, doing some sky watches, just sitting in the backyard in a lawn chair with a nice, iced tea, coffee, whatever it is, adult beverage, whatever, works for you. This is an excellent opportunity, especially in the spring, March and April. Maybe you got to turn the fire pit on or something of that sort. But this is a great opportunity to start watching migrant waterfowl flying over. The raptors are following the food sources, so they begin moving as well. You get a little bit of a shadow indicator of this stuff happening. Hawk Ridge does spring hawk counts as well as fall counts. And when you see the numbers start ticking up, if they're sharing them on their Facebook page, the MOU is resharing their content as well. When Frank Nicoletti is out on the Hawk Ridge or at Angry Tower, whatever it might be, when they're out and seeing a lot of raptors, you can do the same thing from your yard and start to watch some of these birds fly by. Now, you might not have the density that they do, but this is a great, excellent opportunity. A little bit of a flex here. These are a couple of my absolute best flyovers. In 2019 in January, I stepped out in the driveway. Of course, I had all of my optics with me. I was about to go birding and I looked up and I saw crows mobbing another bird that I assumed was a red-tailed hawk, and it actually turned out to be a middle of the day long-eared owl. I don't know where this poor bird got scared up from, but it is about as uncommon to find a long-eared owl in the middle of the day as it would be to see a UFO as far as I'm concerned. So this is definitely a high point of 2019 for me, and that was the year that I traveled all over the state. So I saw one of my most amazing birds literally in my own driveway above my head, and all because I did not write it off as just a red-tailed hawk or something being chased by crows. This one here was also pretty special. This was in March. We had had a little bit of a rough go of it in February. In fact, it was one of our snowiest months ever. Finally, March got rolling. And while I'm working from my office window that I'm sitting in right now, I looked out, saw a bit of movement, threw my binoculars up on it, and I saw some white in there. Then I immediately grabbed my camera, got a zoom shot before they moved out of view, and circled here is one of two cackling geese and a Ross's goose. The data below is from the MOU that year in March, and we can see here there are very few sightings that early in the month. In fact, I had the first sighting of Ross's goose in the entire state of Minnesota, and I was standing in my office. And that I think just points out the power of observation, even from your own home, even from your own neighborhood. There are a lot of things happening around you. The sky is alive with birds in the spring. So I kind of leapfrog here a bit into the birding doldrums. This idea that once migration has happened, once the warblers are gone, once they push through, and all of that stuff happens, birds are on territory, and then it gets very routine, very rote, and nothing is really happening. But the truth is, there's a lot of things, a lot of shadow events happening all around us all the time with the birds, but it can be very hard to discover them. If you go to a park somewhat irregularly, and maybe nearby me is Lake Elmo Park. If I go into Lake Elmo Park and I find some orchard orioles, I might just assume they've always been there. They bred there, they nested there, they fledged, they've been feeding their young, because I don't have a lot of observations. The more you observe your yard and your adjacent neighborhood, the more likely you are to detect small changes in what is happening around you. So you develop this consistency around you, the location you spend the majority of your time. At least I assume that's the case for many people on it. And then you can detect a few things. So I just need to move a thing here on my screen so I can see. This is a morning route. So this is sort of like my pandemic birding route. I would get up in the morning, and right around sunrise, I would go out for a 1-mile walk before I start work in my home office. I selected this route because during breeding season, it provides me the best opportunity with the most amount of microhabitats that we'll talk about in a minute. But we can see on this list some interesting things happen because I know this route so well and performed it at least 5 days a week, if not more. I would see things happen that I know were not consistent. An adult male bobolink flying through the air across this grassland area on June 11th. The bird probably should be on territory. It could be a late arrival. That's certainly possible. It could be moving between habitats, still looking for a mate. You heard Ann talk about desperation. This bird might have gotten chased off. Anything could be the situation or scenario. All I know for certain is it is a one-day wonder. I only heard it on that one day. I did not see it since then, and I observed this prairie pseudo grassland space fairly regularly. On July 5th, in the lower right section of that image, there is a postage stamp of a retention pond that is choked out with cattails. July 5th, I hear a Virginia rail call one time and one time only on a morning route. Never heard it again, never heard it prior to that moment. And that is July. So this is a bird that is somehow leaving a location it was at. It was chased off of it. We don't know the circumstances, but I do know that it was not there before, or at least it wasn't making any noise before, and it didn't make any noise thereafter. So it probably did not stick on that location, but definitely something of interest. The location number 3 here, this is retention pond. It's got a couple of nice snags on it, and suddenly an adult male indigo bunting starts singing from this perch for about 4 days in a row, and then it just stopped. There was nothing else. Was it an unmated bird? Did they have a failed nest? Was it chased off territory? Did it lose territory? Did its mate die? Any of these are possible, but on July 13th, we are well into breeding season at this point, and we would expect indigo bunting to be most likely dedicated to a location. In fact, indigo buntings have the tendency to stay on a location till the bitter end and sing and hold that territory until it's time to migrate, well into the fall. And I mentioned orchard orioles. So there's a little bit of scrub right at number 4 here. There's a power line that cuts through this location, so it doesn't get mowed very much. And I have an entire family show up on July 19th. And so when I say entire family, it was literally an adult male and 3 juveniles. There could have been, one of them could have been the female. I wasn't 100% sure on that, but 4 birds just showed up and they were there for about a week. So there was no nesting, there was no territorial holding during this time. I'm usually fairly good at identifying orchard orioles when they come into a location, but these 4 birds showed up. There is an adjacent golf course to the west, just across the road that's on the left edge of that image in there. It's possible they nested there and they just moved into this location, so a little bit of post-breeding dispersal. Anything's possible, but the juveniles were definitely chasing the adult male around, and I would presume maybe female as well in that. And then the last one to reference in here, we know that sedge wrens have the tendency to go for multiple broods a year. So the early arrivals hit a nice, thick grassy area. This area here was relatively short early in the year, but it got much grassier and longer in July, late July, and a bird showed up. I heard him from my office window. It was singing in the reeds for 2 days only, and that was it. Never heard the bird again. So it tried this location, didn't get any results, or maybe it was just moving through. Anything is certainly possible in that space. But again, these regular efforts and knowing your own space exceedingly well can help give you a view or a vision of what is happening during these birding doldrums. It's not just completely static. It's not birds feeding young, fledging young, holding territory, and then they start migrating. There's all kinds of other things happening with birds moving through, and the more you know your own space and area, the better your odds are of finding these little oddities happening. I'll probably jump through this relatively quickly on microhabitat, but the whole point of this is we live in urban environments a lot of times, and certainly if you're in a rural environment, this is going to be a little bit different, but there's all kinds of fractured habitat all around you in your spaces. And actually, I circled a bunch here. So this is an image that I had to clip and move to the side. So you can see in the blue boxes, that's where my home is located. On the left, it's at the bottom of the screen, on the right at the top. So these images stack one on top of the other. But in the spaces that I cover, you can see all of these small little habitat pieces that birds are actively using. In number 1, it's a deep retention pond that holds some diving ducks in migration. It also has the tendency to pull in Wilson snipe upon migration, but so does item number 6. I can usually get Wilson snipe in that location as well. Number 2 has a lot of bird feeders nearby, so the red-winged blackbirds come back there very early. Number 5, I had white-winged crossbills, and you'll see some pictures in a minute on those. That's where they stop by during their eruption. And identifying all these little points and stuff and keeping an eye on them, you can start to get an idea of how birds utilize these small microhabitat spaces during migration, but also how they use them for breeding. What happens when things change? What happens if somebody mows the entire number 7 and number 6 segment at the end of a year, which is what happened last year on me? And I had nesting eastern meadowlarks and dickcissel and all kinds of crazy good stuff in those, but they mowed it literally to the ground. So now this year, it's like a do-over. What is going to happen? What am I going to see there this year? And I am eagerly awaiting, birds arriving to find out who sticks, who's going to try and hold in that habitat now that it's basically been buzzsawed to the ground. Not necessarily good situations, but it is, like I said, a test bed, a test kitchen to get to know, what is happening in these spaces. Eruption detection. If you have feeders with a variety of seed being offered, almost any house in existence can pull in eruptive finch species and give you these really close-up opportunities from behind glass to watch them. Looking at the third item in here, I had purple finches, pine siskins, common redpoll, and yes, even hoary redpoll and white-winged crossbills all in the last 3 years show up at this new house with really poor habitat in that. And I'm getting close to my end of stuff, but here's a picture. This is from my office window of the neighbor's roof of common redpolls gridding at like -10 degrees and they would show up at my feeders, a couple of the neighbors' feeders as well. The picture on the right is actually in the sales lot for this neighborhood when I first detected hoary redpoll in this flock. That was my county life bird within 30 feet or maybe 60 feet of my door, basically. I actually could stand in my driveway the first time I saw it and pick this bird out. Another time I'm standing in my office as well, and I knew white-winged crossbills were on the way. I paid attention to the Finch report last year, and sure enough, come October, white-winged crossbills showed up on the berm in the yard, and they literally stripped this tree clean. When I got done, I had put some pictures up on my Facebook and Instagram accounts, and they stripped everything off. They spent 2+ hours on one spruce tree and ripped every cone off there they possibly could and just devoured it. It was absolutely amazing to watch. And it was an education that is sometimes only possible in bog habitats where these birds may breed or nest on it. So again, anything is possible. If you spend repeated time birding your own yard, really paying attention to all the habitat around you, the sky, everything around you, stuff is happening on a regular basis. I have had yellow-headed blackbirds show up in my yard 2 years in a row. I'm hoping for a third year. It'd be really cool. One of these birds showed up in late May, which is a super late arrival from what I think. Now, this bird was not an adult male. I think it was its first full year male, so probably or maybe wasn't going to be breeding and was just still kind of roaming around, but it ended up walking right through the nice green grass in the yard and just hanging out. The bird on the right, this was a welcome, actually one of 2 birds that came out from the field across the street and started feeding in the drainage line at the back of our yard in the middle of a freak snowstorm in April of 2019. So that was really cool to watch. Just this last fall, I spent time on the eastern side of our neighborhood, right on the tree line, and the chickadees completely lost their minds, and it took me 15 minutes to find this northern saw-whet owl hanging out in a spruce tree in my own neighborhood. Pop through this. When the retention ponds were really new around the school that was in the pictures I showed just to the south of the house, in August, the shorebird migration kicked off with a 6 shorebird pond in my own neighborhood, giving me the opportunity to observe from my car 30 feet away stilt sandpiper, least sandpiper, semi-palmated sandpiper, and solitary sandpiper. Not something you usually get in your own neighborhood, but muddy edges, retention ponds can be an incredible location to find birds. And because almost all new neighborhoods have really good water retention or water control measures, you get a lot of retention ponds in these spaces, and they can really provide an excellent opportunity. So just a couple of points on the way out, a couple of ideas. A lot of that stuff is possible because my binoculars literally never leave my side when I'm in the house. It's kind of like I just have hardware grafted to me in some way, shape, or form. So always have your binoculars or optics nearby. Keep your windows open as often as you can, and spend some time not watching or listening to TV or whatever so that you can hear things going on outside, especially those crepuscular species like American woodcock I've identified from home, Wilson snipe if you're nearby any marshes or retention ponds and swampy areas. Bring your camera on your walks. Always get an opportunity to take photographs of birds because you might be able to learn something from oddities that are mixing in with others. And then really think about what it is you're seeing, what it is you're hearing, what you remember from last year. Go on the same walks, actually do redundant things, do the same walk, the same circuit on a regular basis, and get to know it intimately. And then you'll know when things have changed or been modified in some way, shape, or form. And really you can become a citizen scientist in that respect and get to know it. That's about as fast as I can go through that content. I'm sorry, I do talk a little bit fast, but limited amount of time in there. So
That's excellent, Ben. Thank you. So again, if you have a question for Ben, go ahead and type it in. There is one question here for you, Ben. What food do you put out at your home?
Yeah, a variety is always good. If you have woodpeckers nearby, suet blocks are definitely a good offering. But if you're looking to just kind of broaden things out a bit, definitely go after black oil sunflower seeds so that you can bring in the grosbeak type species, and a lot of others will utilize that as well. A finch mix is always nice because you can cover a lot of finches and birds that do not crack seed very well, like mourning doves and related dove-like species on there. I find that safflower is a really good offering for finches. The house finches seem to prefer it. Even the goldfinches, even though they've got smaller bills, do seem to like it as well. So giving those offerings, and if you like to get things, some people will call them annoying, like blue jays and others, then whole peanuts in the shell are a really good offering, especially if you put it in a wreath or something that makes it a little bit of a challenge for them to rip them out. You can get a little bit more ground to cover out of that as well on there. So really a good offering bit. And we do offer hummingbird feeders in the right seasons, and sometimes jelly of sorts, though there is some debate on whether or not it's a good idea. So maybe just some whole fruit cut in half if you take like your oranges and stuff as the neotropical migrants are coming in. So variety is the spice of life, and just maybe give yourself 3 different seed options is really good.
All right, I think that's all the questions I'm seeing at this time. So I think what we'll do, we'll take a break here. Right, Dick? How long should we take the break for?
We'll take a break till 10:45, 30 minutes.
So we'll meet back here at 10:45 for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for reminder, if you happen to go off, turn your computer off and come back on, please mute yourself. Make sure that you're muted when you come back on, please.
Can I share screen for a minute? I changed a couple of slides in my program.
Sure thing, Laura, go right ahead.
Yes,
Thanks.
go ahead.
I couldn't resist. Okay. Okay, thank you. Wait, now I have to get out of it again. Stop share. Okay, thanks so much.
You're just enticing us to make sure we're still watching. The beautiful pictures. Okay, break till 10:45.
hiding or lying to me about
For those of you not clicked into the chat as we finish out our break session, we're having a couple of discussions. One is on the programs you would like to see in the 2022 Spring Primer. And the other is what cool birds have you seen in your yard this spring already?
A
And
third
we're
one can be primer or primer.
Is that a British or American pronunciation? Mr. King, do you know?
Yes, it is. It's the difference between the one side or the other of the pond, as they say. So we're primer, or you can use primer. That's a lot of people stick with primer, but primer has a lot of different meanings to it, and so
Primer is what you put on the wall.
that's a starter, and this is a starter. So spring birding primer is consistent with being a primer for starting the birding season. That's sort of what we're doing. But I'll go with primer. That's fine. I'm easy. No, here's Laura. She's probably the expert. So
Me, I just say primer because that's the way I learned it as a kid, and I'm not British. Not even a little. I'm Irish, and so we're supposed to not even like those guys.
well, it's 10:45. So Tom, are you on? And I guess we should get back and get started.
Yes, I am on, and I have to be honest, after getting pumped up this morning, listening to all these great presentations about birds, I was going to jump ship and go bird watching. And then I thought, well, no, I made a commitment here. So I'm sticking with it. So I'd like to start the second half from a passage by a gentleman, David Baker, As Patience. Then it picks up one stem leg. This takes time, and sets it down just beyond the other. No splash, breath of a ripple, goes on slowly across the silt, mud, LJ throttled surface, through sedge grass, to stand to its knees in water turning grayer, now that afternoon is evening. Now that afternoon is evening, the gray heron turns blue, bluer than sky, bluer than the mercury blue-black still pond. Our next presenter is Ezra Gosch, who's been birding for 20 years, using eBird to inform birding decisions for the past 11 years, and actively submitting to the platform for the last 7. Ezra became a member of the Minnesota's eBird review team, organizing and vetting information collected by birders is a passion of Ezra's, and he also serves as a spring and fall seasonal reports co-editor for the Minnesota Ornithologists Union's journal, The Loon. Ezra currently studies finance at the University of Minnesota, and when he is not studying, working, or volunteering his time away, he enjoys both reading and talking about birds, or occasionally even looking at them. Ezra, if you're with us, you're up.
Thank you, Tom, and hello, everybody. It's great to see so many new and familiar faces today. Well, today we're going to be talking about the best practices when using eBird and how we can use the site to gather the best quality data possible. Whether you've been using the site for 10 years, 1 year, or just brand new, there's always something to learn. In the meantime, I will try to avoid passive-aggressive ranting. So we're going to start by reviewing the very basics of eBird. First, you have the observers. These are the citizen scientists who go out into the field look at birds, identify them, and gather and enter the data into eBird. You can do this by either stepping out your door into your yard, driving 30 minutes to your local patch, or even driving 6 hours to look for a rarity. The next basic part of eBird is the reviewers. Many people wonder, so why do we need eBird reviewers? The basic answer to that question is any good statistical practice requires sound judgment. What reviewers do, the very basic work is they set filters which will show you the species that you can expect in your area and the numbers that you can expect for them. If you report a species that is not in the list of expected species or report a count higher than the number that is allowed in the filter, it will be flagged by the review robot. Anything that is flagged by the review robot will be manually reviewed by reviewers. There's a lot of other work that reviewers do, but we won't get into that today because this is a talk about eBird data quality rather than eBird reviewing. The next thing that reviewers cover is, the next thing that we will cover is the researchers. The researchers are the people who use eBird data to inform their scientific research and conservation decisions. For example, on the slide here, we can see a map of the common loon and its abundance in North America. This was created by researchers at eBird using data submitted by observers and curated by reviewers. Another way that researchers can use eBird data, it would be an example of somebody who's researching long-billed dowitchers. And long-billed dowitchers are molt migrants. They will go to a spot away from the breeding grounds, molt, and then migrate to where they winter. And these molt migration sites are very, very important in the life cycle of long-billed dowitchers. Unfortunately, many of them are being destroyed. So a researcher could use eBird to identify which sites are important for long-billed dowitchers, and then hopefully take action to preserve these sites. Now that begs the question, why are we using eBird? Of course, there are many other citizen science projects that gather bird data. Well, there's a few reasons for this. The first would be that many other citizen science programs have more rigid protocols than eBird does. For example, if you were doing a breeding bird survey, you'd be on a selected route that was not selected by you. It would have selected stops, and you would be stopping for 3 minutes at each site to listen for birds. Of course, this is great for random sampling and easily comparing data, but it doesn't tell the whole picture. Another reason is global availability. Some projects, such as the Christmas bird count, the breeding bird survey, are limited to a certain geographic area. eBird can be used anywhere from the North Pole to the South Pole. Next, many bird survey data projects have missed the point of migration. Of course, we have Hawk Ridge and other sites that will count and census active migrant birds, but it doesn't really capture the types of habitat that they use during migration stopovers. eBird allows for this to happen. Finally, when you submit a complete checklist on eBird, researchers can infer both presence and absence of species. Some sites, such as iNaturalist, are great for inferring presence. You can't tell what species aren't present. And finally, something that Ben Douglas referenced earlier, each person has a unique observation. There's probably nobody else covering your yard. And sometimes nobody else is covering your patch. So by having as many users as possible, collecting the best quality data, we will be gathering something that can be used by researchers. Now, the very first thing that we must consider when submitting an eBird list is location. First, the location must be accurate. Another thing, it does not necessarily need to be precise. So what you'll often see is people using hotspots that are suggested by EBird users and selected by hotspot editors at EBird. Unfortunately, the hotspot does not actually cover a defined polygon area with hotspot boundaries. It's simply a GPS pin at a certain point. Depending on how large the park is that you're birding at, for example, for Afton State Park is a pretty large state park with many different habitat types. It can be more useful to pin the exact spot where you were birding rather than using the general hotspot pin. Of course, this is a trade-off between birders who want to look at a hotspot and see what's there, and researchers who want as accurate of data as possible. Always make sure the location represents where you birded. I've seen people who submit the checklist with the location of where they're submitting the checklist. For example, back at their home or apartment. Instead, we want to have checklists submitted where you were birding. And finally, location should be pinned to where you started your birding, not the midpoint of your walk or the end of it. Next, we must choose observation protocols. There's a simple rule here. If birding was your primary purpose, there's a traveling or a stationary list. If birding was not your primary purpose, it is an incidental. If birding was your primary purpose, it's a traveling list if you travel more than 100 feet. It's stationary if you travel less than 100 feet. Now, I see a lot of people making mistakes. I'm using incidental lists. They will submit a traveling list for a freeway driving list, but birding was not your primary purpose, driving was. Another example would be people who submit lists, well, they casually looked out their window, then walked away, did something, came back. That is not a concerted effort to survey birds. Other protocols include historical, nocturnal flight count, area, and banding, but these are rarely used and have a very specific purpose. We don't have time to cover these today. The next thing we'll be talking about is the distance and duration of your list. Duration should be at least 3 minutes, preferably 5 or more. Many people will submit only 1 minute or 2 minute checklists, but as complete checklists, such as a traveling or a stationary list, but putting in effort and detecting all birds present is key. And it's really difficult to detect all the birds that are in your area in only a 1 minute or 2 minute stop. The other thing is, don't let their checklist get too long. It's best to keep the time under 3 hours. This is what EBird recommends. And the reason for this is it allows for observations and daily time management to be made that birds are using. For example, morning flight can be expected at 8 a.m., but not 2 p.m. Birds are also more likely to be sitting at 8 a.m. than 2 p.m. The distance should be under 5 miles. This allows for a small area to be used in mapping grids for species presence and absence. Do not backtrack in your distance. This is a survey, so if you walked 1 mile in one direction and then backtrack 1 mile, you only surveyed a 1 mile linear line. Next, new checklists need to be started for new locations. For example, you don't want to submit a checklist at Vandus Lake and then have birds from Sucker Lake on your list as well. Preferably, you should start a new checklist for new habitat types as well, but this can get annoying. If you're walking in a short distance, you have grassland and then you have an old growth forest quickly, but it's better to try to do this. Now we come to complete checklist. A complete checklist is the backbone of the eBird basic data set. So an eBird complete checklist requires a concentrated effort into surveying where you are birding. You're trying to find all the birds present. You must report all the species that you detected, not just the highlights. It should preferably include counts of all birds. It should not just be simply marking each bird as present. We'll get into that more soon. And of course, if a checklist is marked complete, when the eBird app or the eBird site asks you, did you submit a complete checklist? If you submit a complete checklist, researchers can infer counts of 0 for everything that you did not submit. This is what paints the picture, the combination of presence and absence. This paints the picture of status and distribution throughout Minnesota, North America, and the world. Next, we have checklist comments. This is something that many users overlook. They'll often leave their checklist comments blank. These aren't required, but it is a best practice to use your checklist comments. These can include weather data, such as temperature, wind, and cloud cover. They can include habitat types, such as if you were birding at a deep lake, a shallow marsh, an old growth woodland, an early successional grassland mix of shrubs, or if you're birding an open tall grass prairie or a short grass prairie. There's many different types of habitat, and it's best to note where you were birding. Another thing to including your checklist comments is the itinerary. For example, if I'm birding at Vadnais Lake and I start at the north parking lot and I walk down the west end of the lake, circle the island, and go back north, I will note this in my checklist comments. This is because the reason why I do this is that there are different habitats on the east end of the lake and the west end of the lake, and you can expect different species. And it's useful to researchers and other birders to know where you were birding specifically. You can also include non-bird observations in your checklist comments. You can include what mammals you saw, such as squirrels or deer. You can include what people you saw as well. For example, if you ran into a friend who you weren't birding with, you can note that. Finally, checklist comments can include photographs. You can't simply upload your photographs to your checklist comments like you can for your species comments, but you can embed them using either a site like Flickr or photos from your cloud. Here are some great examples of checklist comments. These are all great birders who are very careful scientists. Note that they always note where they were birding. For example, the itinerary. Van says he walked from the railroad tracks to the lock gate and back, 2 circuits. They all include weather data, and they also include the habitat types. Peter Pyle also notes where the different golf locks he saw were, and Van includes a nice photograph of where he was birding. Now, here is one of my biggest pet peeves: people using breeding protocols incorrectly. Breeding protocols should only be used within a species breeding range. Furthermore, they are only appropriate for use during the breeding season. Some examples of things that I've seen them used for incorrectly are sinning dark-eyed juncos in southern Minnesota using the sinning bird breeding code, which would suggest possible breeding, but dark-eyed juncos do not breed in southern Minnesota. Another example would be, I've had dark-eyed juncos sinning in the fall, and I've seen people use sinning dark-eyed junco in the fall, but dark-eyed juncos do not breed in the fall. Another example would be Caspian terns would be noted as feeding young away from nesting sites. For example, Caspian terns have a colony on Garden Island in Lake of the Woods, but somebody might see them feeding young 30, 50 miles away from this colony because the young and parents travel together. But it does not note where the birds were breeding. Finally, common golden eyes. I've seen people use waterfowl to note common golden eye display on the wintering grounds using breeding code to note that. Common golden eyes are not breeding on the wintering grounds, so please do not use breeding codes to note waterfowl displays in this instance. Up here we have a nice example of breeding codes that were used correctly. This was from the breeding season in upstate New York. Finally, everything that I just discussed, such as sinning dark-eyed juncos, Caspian terns feeding young, common golden eye display on the wintering grounds, these are important natural history observations. Although they should not be recorded as breeding codes, it is still important to note them in your species comments on your checklist. Next, we're going to talk about counting birds. First, you should count every bird you see. Avoid using the dreaded X. It's one of my worst nightmares as an eBird reviewer. People will simply mark present when they see a large flock of birds, such as 20,000 waterfowl on Lake Pepin. But the way the eBird site works is it can only recognize an X, meaning the bird was present. And present just means there was one of that species there. Nobody can infer that there was a large number just from an X. You should carefully estimate large numbers of birds to avoid false precision. For example, I do like to count large numbers of waterfowl by ones, but I could miss birds because some dove, some flew off, and I didn't catch the whole flock exactly. So you should count by fives, tens, or hundreds in these instances. You should estimate based off species proportion of the flocks. For example, of the 20,000 birds in Lake Pepin, if half of them were redneck ducks, you would report 10,000 redneck ducks. Of course, getting an accurate estimate would require taking multiple samples. You would not count just one group of 100 birds and say, oh, this is going to represent everything else in the flock. If you want a 95% confidence level, you're going to need to do about 21 samples, if my math is correct, based off the 20,000 flock. Another problem we see is gross misrepresentation of numbers is very common. About a week ago, I was birding at a common spot in the Twin Cities to look at waterfowl. And a few other birds were present at approximately the same time I was. And I did exact one-by-one counts of all the birds present. I found that there were 13 redheads. Another observer who was there reported 300. Now, there is no way that is accurate, and it was simply a guess. So please be careful when you're examining large flocks of birds that the data you collect is actually accurate and not just a simple guess. When you count birds, you should also include fledglings. I've actually seen some people, including reviewers, make the mistake of not counting fledglings because they worried that it would inflate the number of species abundance, but researchers can adjust for this, and we want to know numbers of fledgling and fledgling success. You do not count eggs yet because they are not birds. They will be soon, hopefully. And of course, it should go without saying, but only count each bird once. For example, if you have 15 chickadees coming to your feeder, but each one is coming several times, some people count each single visit as a new bird. And this inflates the number and is an inaccurate picture. Of course, here's an example of Minnesota's own Carl Barden from a recent count of waterfowl, northern pintails in upstate New York. He includes his methods that he used to count and photos of the large flocks. This is a great example. Next, we get to species comments. First, you want to note the context when you're providing a comment on a species, such as this is early, it is a high count, or this is a rare species. You can get in more depth by saying, this is record early by, say, 10 days, or this is the 7th state record. Stating the original finder if found by another observer is helpful. This allows people to gather, the reviewer to go out and reach out to this person and get more information. Species comments that are superfluous are not helpful. I've seen comments where people say, I was eating a sandwich and the bird was prancing in front of me, and that's about the extent of the comment. Superfluous details, just not helpful. Of course, effort in your comments is greatly appreciated. Do not simply say picked or continuing. This really doesn't let people know the details of the sighting, especially in the future, 10 years from now, and you actually forgot to upload your pics or add further details. Of course, comments are not merely reserved for rare birds. Take field notes, know what birds are doing and what you saw. The history, so we're going to talk about actually documenting rare birds for EBird. We're going to briefly cover the history of documentation. Specimens is the old way, it's the historical gold standard of documentation. We don't see specimens on EBird, we don't count dead birds. Of course, specimens are not always accurate because takes can be inaccurate, and the specimen itself can be destroyed. Documentation, we have written documentation. This is what's most open to interpretation, but it's not the worst form of documentation. And then we have media documentation, which is the new age, but always best accompanied by written details. I'm going to provide a quick note on this. On color constancy, your eyes and brain can tell something's true color much better when it is an overly bright or shaded light, rather than say your camera simply taking a picture in shaded or bright light. It's difficult for somebody evaluating the record to tell what the true color of the bird is. Now we're going to talk about written documentation on eBird. First, for rare species, you want to describe the size relative to other birds. You want to discuss the structure of the bird, such as the head shape, the bill size, the primary projection, the tail length, etc. You want to discuss the plumage. You want to age and sex the bird if possible. You want to describe all major parts of the bird, such as the auriculars, the primary feathers, the secondary feathers, the rectrices. And it's also very good to describe if the bird is in molt and what stage of molt it is in. Describe vocalizations, describe the bare parts such as the eye, legs, and bill color, and discuss behavior to let us know what the bird is doing. Of course, written documentation needs to be accompanied based on contemporary field notes. If it's done from memory, it often loses its authenticity. Finally, I cannot stress the importance of learning bird topography, the parts of the bird, enough. If you describe parts accurately, reviewers can know what you are describing, and researchers can as well. So here's an example, a very nice example from my friend in Massachusetts. She found a very rare little stint, and this is a very difficult ID. She goes into great detail here. She describes the context of the record, who she was birding with, and she describes the plumage, the structure, how she ruled out similar species, etc. Then here's another example. It's a briefer example, but again, very good. It should be noted that both of these were accompanied by several photos as well. And it lets us reviewers, anybody else who is evaluating the record, understand what you saw. And then finally, here is an epic from Curtis Moran's, a birder in California. He describes in 1,400 words approximately a white wagtail that he observed, which is a mega rarity in California. Of course, we don't expect this amount of detail, but it is always appreciated. Next, we're going to talk about media documentation. Please include more than one photo for a rarity. Simply including one photo, it can make it difficult for people who evaluate the record to make a judgment on ID, especially if it is not a great stunning photo. Only include identifiable and useful photos. I've seen people include photos that are very poor quality. You can't tell anything. There's no need to clog up the site. And please do not heavily edit your photos. It's best viewed in the original file. Some light cropping, some light editing is acceptable, but we prefer the original file. Finally, all documentation, whether it's media or written, should be submitted to bird records committees if applicable. And you'll see reviewers contacting you and asking you, say, for example, Minnesota, please submit this to the Minnesota Ornithologists Union Records Committee. And eBird reviewers and records committees work closely together to gather documentation. Here is the photos from Curtis's checklist of the white wagtail. And note how he includes photos of the size of the bird. We have a photo of the front of the bird here. You can see the top of the bird here. And finally, you can see an open wing. Anybody who's evaluating this record is going to be very pleased by not only the quality of these photos, but by the number and his selection of which photos he submitted. Quick final note on eBird best practices is be professional. If you keep an eBird profile, don't try to be cracking jokes in it. Some humor is acceptable, but please try to come across as a serious birder. Secondly, when you communicate with reviewers, always be respectful, and it's expected that reviewers will be respectful as well. Unfortunately, we have had many reviewers, myself included, have experienced abusive users, and it should be noted that eBird will ban users for this. Then finally, don't keep checklists and species comments relevant and keep them professional. I've seen people talk about using illicit drugs in their species comments, and once again, that is simply inappropriate. So some final thoughts. Carefully double check your list. The goal is to collect good scientific data. And if you were doing a math problem, you wouldn't just do it once. You would want to check it twice or as many times as needed to be sure you were correct. Do this with your eBird list as well. Secondly, don't look at your phone. Look at the birds when you're out in the field. If you're looking at your phone on eBird, it can be very difficult to actually detect the true amount of birds present. And then finally, when you actually look at the birds, watch them, observe what they're doing. Don't just glance at them. The more you watch the birds, the better birder you will become, and the better eBirder you will become. And then we will have the best quality data possible. Finally, here's my contact information at the bottom. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to talk about eBird, eBird reviewing, or even just citizen science and the best practices for collecting bird data. Thank you.
Thanks, Ezra. There are a few questions that came in. Why are rock pigeons marked as unreported for my location in Duluth? I see them every single day. This means they do not show up if I use Smart Sort.
So there's a real easy explanation for this. There is a bug in eBird. I've talked to the Marshall Aleph about this when I had people at eBird. So on eBird, we collect data on both feral rock pigeons, what we see in North America, and the wild rock pigeons that you will find in parts of the old world. And the way eBird is set up, it will only collect or indicate, like say the orange dot, red dot, et cetera, based off of the wild rock pigeons. And it's not gathering data on the feral rock pigeons for that part of the app. And that's simply a bug. Just keep on reporting feral rock pigeons. We need that data. And hopefully the bug will be worked out eventually.
Thank you. The next question. Infers a 0 for other species when you submit checklist complete? That's a question. There can be many birds. There can be many birds lurking and you have no idea, except for the one bird you accidentally flushed. Someone nearby once was using a recording of a screech owl. That affected my findings as well. When should we select incomplete?
You should select incomplete if you do not make the best effort that you can do to detect all birds present. And you don't need to be stopping all the time and using playback. Simply walking a lot and listening for the birds and taking your time, not just speed walking through, you're going to detect most birds there. And it should be noted that there's different levels of birding expertise. New birders, we want to know what new birders are detecting, and we want to know what the most experienced birders are detecting, the whole bell curve in between. So don't worry about it. Just try to detect, do the best you can, and it's good data.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of a related to your answer here from Sarah. When do you recommend people start using eBird? For newer birders, should they hold off on submitting information on the site until they can confidently identify the vast majority of birds they see?
Well, here's something that I say to that. Of course, we don't want somebody who only knows what a crow is. We love those fledgling birders, as we call them, but some effort is appreciated to learning more than just a few species. But remember, say if I went down to Peru, I would be a new birder there. Even though I know my birds in Minnesota pretty well, it's all relative to where your location is. So you don't need to know the vast majority of birds present to submit to eBird.
Thank you. And last but not least, just curious, what happens if someone's checklist, if they're banned?
Somebody can still submit to eBird, but it will not go into the eBird basic data set of all the data we collect. Reviewers will not see that data. They will not have to sort through it. And other users will not be able to see it. It will only be the person who got banned who can see their data.
Thank you. And this is an important one, so I'm going to throw this one in there. If you can't identify a bird, should you guess?
Absolutely not. You should report it. For example, if you see an unidentifiable gull, report it as gull spot. That's still important data. You should not try to guess and say, oh, that's a herring gull, just because I know there's herring gulls around.
Good. Thank you, Ezra, for your presentation.
You're welcome.
So moving on, Kara Snow is a graduate student at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. Her master's research is on the diet of nestling boreal chickadees and the factors that influence nestling body condition, post-fledgling survival, and post-fledgling dispersal patterns. Kara received her bachelor's degree in wildlife management from the University of Minnesota in 2010. She has volunteered on Earthwatch, studying flammulated owls in Utah, and later to conducting surveys for flammulated owls in Idaho. The last few years, she has been doing field work in the peatlands of northern Minnesota. Please welcome Kara Snow.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Ezra, for your presentation. That was really informative. So I'll get here and hopefully we'll get to this presentation mode. There we go. All right. My name is Kara, and I am going to be talking about the field work in ornithology and how we can all use our birding for science. So just to set the stage, right now there's a lot of concern about the future of the world's birds due to habitat loss and climate change and other factors. And researchers and managers are working to protect vulnerable species and create effective management plans. And to do that, we need to know the most that we can about the birds that we're trying to protect, such as their habitat requirements, breeding biology, the areas where they're most vulnerable, where they spend their time at different stages of their lives, and so on. And to get that data, someone needs to go out there and collect it. So if you've ever been to any ornithological conferences, then you've probably heard about the results of various studies on birds, without perhaps learning too much about the methods and the work that went into gathering the data for those studies. So today I'm going to focus on the hands-on part of bird research, the field work. So first I'm going to briefly go over the three categories of bird field work: surveying, capture and banding, and nest monitoring. So surveys are done to get an idea of where different birds are and how many birds are in a specific location and if those numbers are changing over the years. And a common method for surveying is point counts. So that's when an observer will record all the birds that they see or hear in a certain location over a set time frame. That's usually about 10 minutes. And surveyors must be knowledgeable on the songs of the birds in the area, and they must also be able to identify them by sight. So when I was hired to do point counts in northern Minnesota, I was tested on over 120 different bird songs, and I had to pass that test with 85% higher to do the work. Then there are also raptor counts, which we heard about earlier. Ben was kind of going over that, what goes on at Hawk Ridge. And that's when counters will record the species and number of raptors that fly over the point, and that's typically done during migration. All right, so a big component of bird research involves capturing birds and marking them for individual identification. And through this, we can learn about migration, survival rates, and you can even get an estimate on population sizes. So how do researchers go about capturing birds? Typically, we use mist nets to capture smaller birds. So these are very fine nets that are put up over an area where birds usually fly. The birds can't see it, they fly into it, they get tangled, and then a skilled extractor can come and untangle them from the net. And then for bigger birds, such as raptors, there are other kinds of traps like spring-loaded traps, which I have shown here in that second photo. And those traps are usually baited with like small birds or lure mice. And once a bird is in hand, typically researchers will age and sex the bird if that's possible. They'll take various body measurements and then put a small metal band on its leg that has a unique combination of numbers so that it can be identified if it's ever recaptured. And also there are newer studies that are putting radio or satellite transmitters on birds to track their movements. And lastly, nest monitoring is essential for learning about reproductive success, nesting behavior, nesting habitat selection, and nest predation. And this is where I personally have the most experience as a field researcher. So in order to observe nests, one must first find nests. And typically this is done by two different strategies. So systematic searches, where you essentially walk transects or lines in a certain area, and you just hope to maybe like flush a bird from her nest. And then you can also follow behavioral cues. So that involves spending like lots of hours watching and observing birds to see where they go and how they act in certain areas. So for example, sometimes birds will give alarm calls or do distraction displays when you get to their nests, and that can kind of give you an idea when you're getting close. So once nests are found, which I would say is the hard part, the nests are then frequently checked to assess nest success, failure, clutch number, predation rates, and other things of interest. All right, so now that I've gone over kind of like the basic types of field work, I'm going to go over what a day in the field might look like for a bird field technician. And to do that, I'm going to talk about some of the studies that I've been involved with. So my first big field gig was for the Intermountain Bird Observatory, conducting surveys in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest in Idaho. And for these surveys, we were looking for flammulated owls, northern goshawks, and white-headed woodpeckers. And this study was contracted by the USDA Forest Service. And the Intermountain Bird Observatory was asked to study these birds in particular because they are considered sensitive species. So that means that they're very sensitive to changes in the forest. And the Forest Service is obligated to manage for and protect sensitive species. So knowing where they are and what kind of habitat they're found in is very important. So my role as a field tech for this study was to go out and look for these birds in the forest. So at the start of the week, I was given maps of my assigned study plots, accompanied by a GPS unit that had all the coordinate plots like programmed into it. And the study plots were 1 square kilometer that's shown on the right here, and it has 9 different points within that. And I should mention that the study plots were randomly chosen within the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest. So that means that they weren't chosen because you were likely to find the birds there or because they were easy to get to by trails or roads. In fact, some of the plots were as far as 4 miles away from the road, and there are often no trails to get there. So I had to bushwhack off trail through mountain forest to these places. Oh. When that sounds easier than it is, like, because who hasn't like gone off trail to find a bird before, right? But I'll just say that some of these areas that I had to survey, I basically had to like swim through vegetation. And on top of that, the terrain in the mountains was very steep at some points. And sometimes I had to take indirect routes to get to my different points to avoid like going through a ravine or like a river or just like very steep parts of the forest. And I would say that for this field gig, getting to the survey points was definitely the most difficult part of the job. It would also take a lot of planning to decide where you're going to camp out the previous night before your surveys, what the best route to take to hike into was, and what time to leave in the morning to make sure that you are at your first point before dawn. And also for this study, because it was in such a remote parts of Idaho, we had to be living in the forest while we did our surveys. So that meant between surveys and for weeks at a time, we were camping in the forest. And for me, for the most part, making a home out of the back of my truck. All right, so once you've successfully navigated to your survey point, now it's time to do the work. So to conduct present absent surveys, we did broadcast surveys. To do this, you play the call of the bird that you're looking for very loudly using a game caller, and then wait to see if the bird answers or if it comes close. So here I have a quick clip of myself conducting a northern goshawk survey. So hopefully this works. It is quite loud. So if you have like headphones on, just beware. Okay, hopefully the volume wasn't too bad for you. All right, so we did this for all 3 target species. For the woodpeckers and the goshawks, we do that in the morning. And then for the flammulated owls, we would conduct our surveys after dark. And I could probably spend like another 20 minutes just talking about the challenges of navigating through the forest at night. You know, having shining eyes peering out at you in mountain lion country, which almost always ended up being deer, but it was still kind of terrifying. Hearing strange sounds, and then also like not being able to see far enough ahead of you to know what the right route to take was through the forest. And then combine this with inclement weather and my fantasies that surveys were going to be something like this pretty quickly ended up being a little bit more like this. Well, and not only were birds not landing on my finger, but the reality was that in most surveys, you wouldn't even detect your target species. This is still valuable information, but it was kind of disappointing nonetheless. So for example, for my white-headed woodpecker studies, surveys that I conducted, so that's about 9 a day, 4 days a week for several weeks. I only found one white-headed woodpecker, which I have like some very riveting footage of here. So keep your eyes on the top of the snag. And then maybe about 3, 2, 1, and there it goes. So that was my white-headed woodpecker experience of the field season. And regardless of whether we found birds at the point or not, we would also take vegetation surveys at each point. So that involved things like counting the number of trees in the area, the number of snags that we saw, recording the ground cover, and like all that kind of vegetation stuff. So then that coupled with the presence absence surveys, we could get an idea of what kind of habitats these birds live in and what kinds they might not. So here is a map that was created from like the results of that study and the previous 2 years of field work. And this will be used for conservation in the future. So what you can see on this map here, it's a predicted presence of white-headed woodpeckers. All of these little boxes are where surveys were conducted, and all of the red boxes are where white-headed woodpeckers were detected. So then that information coupled with all of that habitat data, the researchers were able to create a map of what kind of habitat you're likely to find white-headed woodpeckers in. And then they can use these kinds of maps to show to forest managers and say like, hey, this is the kind of habitat that we need to be focusing our management efforts on to protect this species. So that's really cool and important stuff. And I was like very proud to be a part of that study. All right, so for my latest field work has been for the Natural Resource Research Institute out of UMD, and this is actually the project that I'm still involved with for my master's research. And for this project, I'm doing nest monitoring and tracking in the peatlands of northern Minnesota. So for this study, we are looking at the microhabitat preferences of recently fledged Connecticut warblers and boreal chickadees. And the reason that we're looking at this is because the post-fledgling period in birds is a very vulnerable time. And any management plans that can maximize survival during this period can have really positive outcomes on conservation. And this is important because both Connecticut warblers and boreal chickadees are experiencing habitat declines. And so for this study, I had two kind of main components of field work, and that was nest searching and tracking. So boreal chickadees are cavity nesters. Unfortunately, they will readily nest in the nest boxes that we put up. So there wasn't much nest searching for these birds because we would just have to go to the boxes. So daily, we would check boreal chickadee nest boxes, see if they're occupied, if a bird has decided to nest in there, and then if they're occupied, return every couple of days, record the number of eggs when they hatch, what kind of activity the adults are doing nearby, just like that kind of stuff. But Connecticut warbler nests are a very different story. So these guys are ground nesters, and they make their nests in the sphagnum moss of the bog. And their nests are very concealed, and the birds are very wary. So to begin the hunt for warblers nests, we would first locate singing males. And that's not very hard to do because the singing males, they're very loud and they want to be heard by any and every female warbler around. So once we would find those singing males, we would kind of revisit for a couple of days, make sure they're still there, and then we could kind of know that that was a territory of theirs. And then we would like commence nest searching in that area, doing systematic searches. So just kind of walking around, hoping to flush a bird from her nest, but then also mostly following behavioral cues from the parents. So for example, when you would get close to a Connecticut warbler nest, they would do lots of chipping. I experienced them doing broken wing displays a few times when I got extremely close to their nests. So, but it turns out that these birds don't actually want you to find their nests. So last field season, I spent about 30 hours a week for several weeks looking for nests, just like purely all day looking for nests. And in the end, I found a grand total of like 4 nests. But given the nesting nature of these birds, that's actually like pretty good. So I felt okay about that. And I will say, kind of talking, thinking about Alyssa and her sparrow talk, the Lincoln sparrows were like my sworn enemy in the bog because they would blow my cover every time, and they would just start like doing their alarm calls anytime I got into the bog and just like warned all the birds that I was there, and it was so frustrating. But anyways, once we found nests, then we would check them every couple of days to get an idea when they were going to fledge. And then a few days before they fledged, they were banded and also fitted with radio transmitters. So this bird on the left this is actually a golden wing warbler, which is for a different study for the NRI. But I think you can just kind of see its little radio transmitter backpack pretty clearly there. And the birds then, when they leave the nest, they'll keep that little radio transmitter on their back. It does eventually fall off after about 1 to 2 months, just like naturally, like the way it's constructed. So once the backpack birds leave the nest, then it's our job to track them throughout the bog. And we do that using a handheld telemetry device. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how this works, each of those little radio transmitter backpacks emits a signal with a unique identification code. And then we can pick up that signal using a handheld receiver and an antenna. So just a rundown of how this works. You will point the antenna in a direction, you'll wait, you'll receive the signal strength, and then if the antenna point is near where the tag is or pointing in the correct direction, then it will give you back a stronger signal than if it was, say, like the antenna was pointed in the opposite direction of the bird, or if you're farther away. So it's basically like playing hot and cold with birds in the forest. And I have like a little video showing how that works. You take your antenna, you point it into just a direction in the forest. You don't know where they are. Wait a minute for it to pick up on the signal strength. It beeps, bam, and you get your readout. So this is telling me that tag number 102, so there's a specific bird out there with a tag number 102. I'm picking up on its signal, and it's giving me a signal strength of 74. So that's kind of low. So after that, I would point the antenna in a different direction and see if I get a higher or lower signal strength, and that will kind of show me where to go from there. So once we find the birds in the forest, which sometimes takes a few hours because, you know, you're just kind of starting from nowhere, then we would mark the location with a GPS, mark the tree that we found them in, and then later come back to do vegetation surveys to see what kind of habitat the young recently fledged birds are using. And so this is just a picture of what a habitat survey likes. You're counting all the trees within a certain area, you're noting ground cover, what kind of tree species, how big they are, all of that kind of stuff. So every field season has its own kind of like unique set of challenges. So for the Idaho gig, that was just like navigating to different points because the terrain was so terrible. But in the peatlands work, that difficulty and challenge was definitely the mosquito situation. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to a bog in the summer. Alyssa was kind of talking about that, but the mosquito situation is like nothing short of astronomical. And like we wear head nets and we cover our bodies, but like that can only help you so much. And it does make like trying to go to the bathroom or eat anything while you're out in the field season like slightly uncomfortable. You know, it's an adventure, right? That's why you do it. So a day in the field is like anything but boring. You know, it's not predictable. You don't know what you're going to see. It's very like rewarding and meaningful work, and it can take you to like beautiful remote places, and it can challenge you. And from my personal experiences, that helped me grow as a person. So I just really love it and recommend it for anybody who thinks that it could be for them. Here's just a little video of a dusky grouse that I ran into in Idaho. This guy was drumming before I heard him, and I actually thought that it was a bear, so I hid from it for like 5 minutes. But then when I finally got the courage to pop my head out, it was just this dude. But anyways, I just wanted to end my talk going over the different ways that like we all can use our interest and our knowledge for birds for science, and that's through volunteering, citizen science, or even becoming a field technician. So there are countless options out there, volunteer options out there. So I'm just going to highlight a couple that I have experience with. So the Red-Headed Woodpecker Recovery Project is out of Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve in East Bethel. And that relies on volunteers to collect important data on red-headed woodpeckers. And I think some of their in-person volunteer work right now is like temporarily on hold due to COVID, but that's going to be coming back soon. But they're also going to be launching their woodpecker cavity cam project soon. And they're going to be looking for volunteers to observe like video footage from their cavity cameras. So that's pretty cool. Keep your eyes out for that. Then there's also this organization called Earthwatch, where you basically pay to do volunteer field work for a short period of time. But these are on like incredible wildlife projects, all different kinds of animals, lots of bird projects all over the world. And that money that you pay actually goes towards funding the research. So that's really cool. Then there are loads of citizen science opportunities, so such as Project Feeder Watch, the Great Backyard Bird Count, Global Big Day, which is coming up in May, the Christmas Bird Count, and then as Ezra just went over, EBird. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology organizes a lot of these citizen science things. So if this looks interesting to you, then I encourage you to check out their website for those opportunities. And then lastly, when I was giving my presentation, if you're thinking like, whoa, like, yeah, this is for me, this looks awesome, I want exciting adventure, then I really encourage you to look into becoming a field technician. The website Ornithology Exchange is a good place to start looking for bird-related field gigs. And I'll mention that a lot of these field jobs, but not all, but a lot of them do require like a bachelor's degree in biology, ecology, or environmental sciences. And then depending on the kind of nature of the work, some of these jobs have like physical ability requirements, like you have to be able to hike a certain amount of miles in a day, stuff like that. And then lastly, some employers will require that you have some kind of previous experience with various field methods, but a lot of those you can get through volunteering or citizen science work. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that. And I want to thank you all for listening. I also want to thank the MOU and the NRI, and then also Carpenter Nature Center and Jen Veith for mentoring me and supporting me. And with that, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Kara. Let me throw in a plug here. I am the Natural Resource Manager for Dakota County Parks. And we do utilize volunteers helping us do breeding bird surveys. So if someone wants something closer to home, I would encourage everybody to go out to the parks. We have some incredible parks that have great birds in them. But so if anybody is interested in that, they can, in helping us doing these surveys, you can give me a call. So there are a few questions here that I'll throw out to you, Kara. I'm curious, but so is the person who wrote this. It is my understanding that by and large, behavioral cues is best for finding bird nests. Systematic rope dragging only really works for waterfowl and game birds in open environments. Which do you think is most ideal and commonly practiced?
Yeah, so I've only done nest searching for songbirds, and definitely behavioral cues is a lot better method. We ended up doing systematic searching, so just like walking transects in this situation because the birds were so sneaky, and we didn't have a lot of behavioral cues from them. However, almost all the nests that we did end up finding were from behavioral cues and not actually from the systematic searches. And I haven't had any experience with rope dragging, so I can't say too much about that.
Fair enough. Another question, were you solo or in pairs? Safety issue considering the terrain.
Yeah, so for the Idaho job with the woodpecker surveys and the goshawk surveys, which were during the day, that was solo work. But then the flammulated owl surveys, considering that it was at night, those were in pairs. And I will say that some field work is dangerous work, and people can get hurt on it. I was provided like an inReach unit, so in case anything did happen, no matter if I didn't have cell phone service or whatever, I could press that and get help however I needed it.
Well, that's good. And I think this pertains to the radio transmitters that we're putting on the fledgling babies. How intrusive is this for the birds?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And there are specific like weight requirements that they have to be at, so to make sure that they're weigh enough, and that the tags aren't going to be like too heavy to like kind of like interfere with their movement. But it is like they do require to be handled, so it is kind of that the kind of balance between like what kind of information that we're going to be getting out of this and like what kind of stress that we're going to be putting on the birds. And for this study, we found that that putting those radio transmitters on the bird and the kind of information that we could get from them was worth it. But they were able, like the boreal chickadees were cruising around with their transmitters and stuff, no problem.
Great. I think this is a related question. When tagging the almost fledgling chicks, did that ever result in forced fledgling, chicks fledging earlier than they normally would have due to human disturbance? I know that occurs with grassland birds.
That certainly can happen, and that did happen. I think once on our study, we watch the birds. We do nest checks like almost every day when they're getting close, so that we're like try to do that as soon as we can, so that we do lower that risk of forced fledgling. But that definitely is a possibility.
Okay. Can you talk about triangulation in surveying?
No, I can't.
Fair enough. Love you. Okay, here's one from Ezra. What's your favorite? Mosquitoes, ticks, or flies?
They're all really terrible. I think ticks are really bad because they can get you sick. So yeah, I think ticks are the worst, but they're all not very fun.
Sure. All right, well, thank you so
Okay.
much, Kara.
Thank you.
Again, if you have questions for her or follow-up questions, you can contact her. I see her thing is gone there, but through email. Our next presenter, Laura Erickson, fell in love with warblers her first spring birding, which was back in 1975, and has spent the following 46 years birding and inviting other people to discover the wonders of birds. When she moved to God's country, or Minnesota, some people call it, in 1981, Laura became active with the Duluth Audubon and Hawk Ridge, began producing a radio program, now a podcast, called For the Birds, became a wildlife rehabilitator focused on birds, wrote 12 books about birds, and served for 2.5 years as the science editor at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Welcome, Laura Erickson.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm grateful that I was invited. There are too many warblers to really go over. I'm not quite as ambitious as Alyssa was with the Sparrows. So we're going to approach it a different way. I started warbler watching in 1975. This was my Bible. This was the page I fell in love with when I read that book. I did a big year in 2013, and my goal, one of my goals, it was a low-key big year, and I only covered the lower 48 states, but I wanted to see every one of the birds on these 2 pages except the poor extinct one, Bachman's warbler, and I succeeded in that. There were 48 species here. There's also one hybrid, the Brewster's warbler up here, but which I did see, but I also saw a species that wasn't on here. I think the Kalima is the one that they didn't picture here. Nowadays, people use a fancier warbler guide, which is humongously thick and has so many warblers. And what I remember when I started being so bewildered by the possibilities, it was very frightening. And the Warbler Guide has all this stuff. You can buy the book, you can also get their app. But you can also use just a regular old field guide. But whatever you do, my first rule of warbler identification is don't panic. You don't have to get all of them your first time out. My second rule of warbler identification is to learn well a few common warblers first. And the best one to start with, because it will be one of the first to show up in Minnesota, is the yellow-rumped warbler. This is an incredibly handsome bird. And the cool thing is the very first ones to appear in the state will be the fancy adult males that have that bright yellow on their upper breast, right where it meets the wing, the yellow cap, and so those are very easily seen, but they also have that yellow rump. They live up to their name. So that is the first warbler to learn. You'll see them all over. If you have a bird bath, they'll come to that, and they'll be in backyards. But in recent years, I took this picture back in like 2004 with one during some really cold weather coming to my feeder. But yellow rump warblers more and more are showing up in backyard feeders. This one was not at a feeder, it was at a sliding glass door where a whole bunch of cluster flies were on the inside. I had taken my mother-in-law to a house, and it could see all these cluster flies. So what I would do is use a newspaper and be smashing them, collect them, put them out there, and this was during fall, would come pig out on the cluster flies they threw out, and then would come back to the window expecting me to give more. So that was cool. But they also come to my feeder. This I took last spring. They were coming to my peanut butter feeder, and this I just made a little video of all the yellow-rumped warblers coming to my super suet. That's one of the ones that they sell at Wild Birds Unlimited is where I got that. But learn these common warblers first. They're not in that beautiful adult male plumage because this I took last early fall. but they just come to feeders like this sometimes. And when you're lucky when they do. Last spring, I didn't have nearly as many as I'd had the previous spring. Another common warbler is the black and white. Get to know that. This one will not hang out in warbler flocks with the others. The common yellowthroat, which is not the yellow-throated warbler, but is a warbler. But the common yellowthroat hangs out more in cattail marshes and brushy fields. But get to know this one too, because it's one of the basics. And get to know the American redstart. It's pretty easy. My third rule of warbler identification is don't get too fixated on field marks. Remember, I told you about that yellow-rumped warbler that lives up to its name. This is not a yellow-rumped warbler. This one's a Nashville warbler. This one is a Cape May warbler. This one hit a window when I was working at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but it has a yellow rump, but this one's a magnolia warbler. So don't get too fixated on that. This, on the other hand, is a yellow-rumped warbler, and it does have a very pale yellow rump, but it's a leucistic bird. Some birds do not have the proper field marks because they have aberrant plumage, and I threw this in just for Ann Kessen after I heard her talk. This is not a Brewster's or a Lawrence's warbler. It's a hybrid of one of those hybrids backbreeding with a golden-winged warbler. I got this picture in Maine 2 years ago. I have an old field guide, the Audubon Land Bird Guide, that actually showed the hybrid variations and the two parent species, the golden-winged and the blue-winged warbler. So don't get too fixated on field marks because some birds are not going to have them, or it's going to be bewildering, or more than one species has the same field mark. But don't forget about field marks. They can be very useful. This is a Nashville warbler, and it has two very good field marks, and I left out the third. It has an eye ring. It does not have wing bars, so the field mark is a wing that does not have wing bars, but also it has a yellow throat, and that will help you if you're up here or just feeling lucky and you look at one and you think, oh my, that must be a Connecticut warbler. But no, because it has a yellow throat, Connecticut warblers have a gray hood all around their head. But you could be in bad light in all kinds of vegetation, and you could see that lack of wing bars, the yellow throat, and the white eye ring. These were really grainy pictures on a yucky day in my yard. I thought that was a field mark when I first started birding because I saw in the field guide that Nashville warblers have a rusty cap. But it's like the crown on a ruby crown kinglet. It can be concealed with other head feathers. And so it doesn't show up in all the males, not if they're relaxed. And also the females don't have it. So don't think of that as a field mark that you must see, though I did not count this bird on my life list until I did see that rusty cap. Here's that Connecticut warbler with its white eye ring. It does not have wing bars, but see the hood on it. It does not have the yellow throat of the Nashville warbler. The mourning warbler does not have an eye ring, except some of them, females and young birds in particular, can have a partial eye ring or even what looks like a full eye ring, especially in the fall. But they not only have that gray hood like the Connecticut, but the adult males, it's smudged with that black across the breast, and that's very distinctive. One of the wonderful things about warblers is the ones that sing are the ones that are most going to call your eyes to them, and those are the adult males, except in the redstarts, the immature males sing too. The 1-year-olds don't have adult male plumage yet in spring, but So most of the warblers you will see when you first start paying attention to them will be adult males. So you can look at that fancier plumage. Now, I always thought the Blackbirdian warbler, the best field mark was that golden orange head, but they have another important field mark, that broad white patch. You wouldn't call that a wing bar. It's too broad for that on its wing, but it's not the only warbler with that. The magnolia warbler has it, as does the Cape May warbler. So, but you start paying attention to those things, and you can have smaller glimpses of a bird and still be able to identify it. But notice on this Cape May warbler that this is another species with a yellow rump. Another field mark that works for two warblers is when they have a necklace. This is a magnolia warbler. It's got a black choker with these nice pretty black streamers coming down. The other warbler that has a necklace is the Canada warbler that has that necklace with the streamers. They aren't as long. Now, you wouldn't necessarily confuse them because they look pretty different. I already showed you that big white area on the magnolia warbler's wing. This one, the Canada warbler, does not have wing bars. Here's two that were being banded in Ohio when I got this picture, and their faces look totally different. Their wings look totally different, and so they're not that hard to tell apart, but it was bewildering my first spring birding. I saw what I had to thumb through the field guide to find the page with the birds that looked like it. And I was sure the bird had wing bars. And I looked up, and the bird I saw in the exact same place did not have wing bars. And so it was very bewildering. You can pay attention to other features like a little bit of chestnut on them. The bay-breasted warbler has that, and the chestnut-sided warbler has that, but they're in different areas. The bay-breast has that bay all the way up to its throat and its upper sides. The chestnut-side warbler, on older males, it can go all the way up, but not to the throat, which is white. So and then they don't even look alike, but it's bewildering at first. So don't panic. My fifth rule of warbler identification is to read your field guide. And some of the field guides are a little more entry level than others. This is my grandson, by the way. I threw this in for Erik Bruhnke to get his Walter fix for the day. But no matter which field guide you use, read it a lot. And with the warblers, keep it by your kitchen table if that's where you sit and drink your coffee in the morning, or put it on next to your bed, or put it in the bathroom, someplace where you could just be thumbing through the warbler pages. And don't just look at the pictures, read the entries. That is where you pick up cool things to look for in the field, like the palm warbler. It not only has those yellow undertail coverts, but it wags its tail up and down. And if you're looking for that, you will recognize a palm warbler by the yellow under the tail and the wagging, no matter what time of year it is. I took this on my backyard fence last fall. Look at the Cape May warbler, not only at the field marks, that yellow collar and the orange cheeks on the adult male, but if you read your field guide, you will find out that they have a sweet beak. They drink nectar, they eat fruit. And so they're ones that will actually come to your orange feeders, especially if we have a real bad cold snap during spring migration. This one's coming to jelly. I just have small spoonfuls at the bottom of that bowl. This is a male, this is 3 females. And even though they have that yellow collar, at least somewhat visible, they don't have the orange cheek, but that sweet beak, that attraction to fruit, is what tells me they're Cape Mays. They also will occasionally pretend they're hummingbirds and come to a hummingbird feeder. Once in a while, they'll come to suet, but they're much more likely to come to sweet things. And that includes natural sweet things. If you see a warbler at a yellow-bellied sapsucker drill hole, there's a high probability that it'll be a Cape May warbler. But birds are functionally illiterate, and so they do not read those field guides. And some other warblers might discover that these also have insects in them. And so other warblers will sometimes come to these. But your field guide, reading it, you'll find out little things about the warblers you hope to see, and those will improve your chances of seeing them. My sixth rule of warbler identification is learn some easy songs. And I'm using headphones today, and that means you can't hear my computer. So I'm just going to give you the mnemonics. The black-throated green warbler has two different buzzy songs, z, z, zoo, zoo, z, and z, 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 zoo, z. And some people say it sounds like pines, pines, murmuring pines, but that does not sound buzzy like Z, Z, Zoo, Zoo, Z does. But listen to those. Use Zeno Canto, use the Cornell Labs All About Birds, or any other source. The Sibley app has all the songs of all the birds in the Sibley Field Guide in his app. You can listen to the songs at home and just pick a few. Don't try to listen to all of them, or they'll get jumbled in your brain when you're first learning them. Ovenbirds have a loud, and it gets louder. It's a crescendo, teacher, 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 teacher. And they do not read, they're functionally illiterate too, so it doesn't occur to them that we say teacher, 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 teacher. They have the emphasis on the second syllable. They are very secretive, and so you will hear many more ovenbirds than you see, so learn that song. The mourning warbler has, I learned that as one of my first bird songs, because in my brain, they're singing cheese, cheese for me, for me. It's like two parts, and it's a little bit buried, the cheese, cheese, cheese for me, for me. But if you hear that, I know it's a mourning warbler. The common yellowthroat, it can be witchety, 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 witch, or looky here, looky here, looky here, looky here. And so that's a useful one to know. That one will not be singing in the woods where all the other warblers are, though. The pine warbler, it's not an easy song. It's a trill like a chipping sparrow. And both of them can be in the same woods. And in my mind, when I have chipping and pine warblers singing in the same woods, their songs are a little bit closer to what the other one sounds like than when I find just pine warblers or just chipping sparrows. But it's just the steady, I can't even do it, but it's a steady trill. And the pine warbler's a little bit more musical than the chipping sparrow and a tiny bit slower. But learn when you hear that where there are pine trees, scan the trees. It may well be a chipping sparrow, but you might luck into a pine warbler. Juncos also have that call song. We mainly hear them in southern Minnesota and central Minnesota during migration. We hear them, and I would not call a singing junco in my yard a nesting bird, because they don't nest in my neighborhood, so I wouldn't worry about that on EBird, Ezra. But in the woods where they do nest, you have to be a little careful, but the juncos tends to be shorter. The yellow warbler, one of their songs is easy to learn. It's the sweet, sweet, aren't I sweet? But they also have a song that is very, very much like the chestnut-sided warbler song. So, but after you've mastered these, then learn. Just add to them one by one with birds that you're hoping to see or birds that you are getting familiar with. My seventh rule of warbler identification is set up ground level bird baths. Here's mine, and I have this with a nest cam a few feet away, so I get to see the American Birding Association's Bird of the Year at my bird bath last summer, before it was the Bird of the Year. Now it may expect better treatment. But it also brings in warblers. This is a yellow warbler last summer, a yellow-rumped warbler that was coming, and then the purple finch, and they get into a bickering mode. But I've had all kinds of birds coming to my ground level bird bath on Hog Island in Maine, where the Audubon has a National Audubon has a camp. I took these pictures: Blackburnian, black-throated green, northern Parula, and I've seen all of these in my backyard, though I don't necessarily have photos. My 8th rule is if you have a camera, use it. I've forked out my family's entire discretionary income for my camera back when I worked full-time at Cornell and had an income with which to buy it. But you don't need to have that fancy of a camera. You can use one of the extended zoom cameras. You can use a little point and shoot, though it helps if you're digiscoping using your spotting scope then, and that makes it hard with warblers because it's hard to get warblers in your spotting scope in time. But there's no big deal if your photos are crappy. 99% of my photos are throwaways, but every now and then one turns out really well. And also set trail cams. You can buy fairly inexpensive trail cams, put them at the minimum distance from your bird bath or your bird feeder, and you can get videos. This one is a trail cam picture of my feeder last summer, and I had the trail cam set on a tripod as close to this as the focal distance. So you could see a chickadee flying in, you could see the yellow rump warbler, and you could see these purple finches. I've seen all kinds of cool birds thanks to having my trail cam. My 9th rule of warbler identification is pay attention to chickadees. During migration, when the warblers are passing through, they're strangers. You could think of them as the homeless, and during storms, they're tempest tossed, and chickadees welcome them into their flocks. I have 27 warblers on my yard list, and that is just a little backyard on Peabody Street in Duluth, just a residential neighborhood. The way I built it up was during my first years here, whenever a chickadee showed up at the feeder, I ran out with my binoculars. Warblers do not come to feeders, but they were hanging out with the chickadee flocks, so they'd be up in the trees and down in the shrubberies. And that's how I added to my warbler list. They're like the little statues of liberty, welcoming everyone to they're lifting their lamp to everybody. The 10th rule of warbler identification: have fun out there. Don't get panicky if you can't identify them all. The end, or is it? On May 11th, 1975, I saw my first warbler, my second warbler, these are not them, of course, my third warbler, and my fourth warbler. On May 13th, I added my fifth warbler. I saw 5 warblers that whole first spring, going out every single day of birding. But that was fine. That was the beginning. Don't panic. Just get out there and enjoy birds. Bird well and often. And that's the end. Oh, I'll go back to that for a little bit so you can, while we ask questions, so you can get my email if you want. I will happily answer questions.
Thanks, Laura. It really gets me pumped to get out and start looking for these. Any questions from y'all? A lot of kudos. That was awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Any more books planned for you?
Any more what?
Books planned for you?
Yeah, I've just in the process of finishing one about plants for birds, native plants. It unfortunately, in a way, covers the whole continent. St. Paul Audubon did a great pamphlet about native plants, and smaller is better in a way because you don't want just native plants native to North America. You want them native to your yard.
Correct.
To your area, yeah.
Can a ground bird bath include a balcony one? Will it attract warblers up there?
You never know. Warblers notice the sound of dripping. One of my bird baths, the one you saw that pileated woodpecker at, is an old kitty litter um, thing, and I have a lot of stones, so the water isn't deep. And on it, I have the top of a broken bird bath, but it had a little solar fountain. And so I put that in the kitty litter box. That's where it draws up. It's a recirculating fountain. And the sound and the movement of the water are what attract the warblers.
So Pat asks, where should I start scanning? Canopies, ground?
Wherever you're hearing sound. Some warblers are low species that find things at our eye level or below. Ovenbirds, water thrushes, very often magnolia warblers, when you see them on their breeding grounds, are at eye level. Chestnut-sided warblers, but some are very, very much treetop level warblers, like the black-throated green and especially the blackbirdian. But both of those come down to bird baths, especially during fall migration, starting at the end of July, but also during spring migration. So I would have a bird bath, hoping that they'll show up. I also have a nice two-tier bird bath. It was actually a single bird bath, just a fairly inexpensive shallow tray, but I put another one beneath it. The stand for it is like 8 inches high or 10 inches high, and the other one, and then I hooked up our garden hose with a dripper that I bought at Wild Birds Unlimited, but they have them at other bird places, and it drips into the top, and then as the water fills up there, it drips into the lower one, and both of them have brought in lots of interesting birds, including that pileated woodpecker.
That's great with this early spring. It could be a situation where the leaves are emerging quite far when the majority of the warblers come through, which makes it a wonderful challenge to see them up there when the leaves are coming out.
Yeah. All you can do is don't panic, hope for the best, keep scanning up there, look for movement, listen for songs. The more I learned my songs just a few at a time, but I kept building on them. And so I was really knowledgeable about a few, and then I could add 2 or 3 more and add 2 or 3 more, and pretty soon it was a lot. But even if you don't recognize the song, look where the song is coming from. In some ways, especially if you don't recognize the song, look where the song's coming from. But also just to keep from getting too cocky, look where the song is coming from, even when you think you know the song, because that's how I found out after living here for a couple of years that the Blackburnian warblers up here often have just a weesey, weesey, weesey. It's higher pitched and shorter, but otherwise sounds a lot like a black and white warbler. So,
well, thank you so much, Laura. Our last presenter this morning, and I guess it's afternoon now, is Erik Bruhnke, who's loved birds since he was a child, looking at chickadees. He graduated from Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin. I'm so proud, that's where I graduated from as well, with a natural resources degree in 2008, and taught field ornithology at Northland College for 3 semesters. For several years after graduating, his springs and summers were spent conducting bird surveys through northern forests, vast prairies, and western mountains. He worked as an interpreter for 6 fall seasons at the Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory in Duluth. Last fall, he worked at the Cape May Hawk Watch as an interpreter, connecting people with the spectacle of migration and raptor identification. Erik's wildlife photography has won national awards, and his writings have been featured among birding magazines. Erik is a birding tour guide for Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours, as well as his own business, Naturally Avian. Welcome, Erik. It's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, great. Well, I am delighted and honored to be here with all of you today. And also, I'm just so pleased to be part of this arrangement of presenters this morning. It's been such a fun time personally to experience everyone's wonderful talks. And this afternoon, I'm going to give you a little feel of identifying raptors in Minnesota, found in Minnesota. We're going to focus on raptors that are commonly seen throughout Minnesota. So there's a few rarities that show up once every few years. We're going to omit them, but my biggest goal for this morning is to simply provide each of you with a special and memorable time of grasping raptors in a different angle, in a different sense, so that they're not intimidating when you see them next. All right. Go full screen, here we go. So, introduction to raptors of Minnesota. This is a Cooper's hawk, by the way, juvenile Cooper's hawk. And first things first, when getting into raptor identification, especially if you're new to raptor identification, it can be a little overwhelming. And part of this is many of us don't see raptors all that often, or they might be casual flybys throughout the yard. But unless if you've spent many years at various hawk watches throughout the country, like I said, raptors can be a little on the challenging side. So this bird right here, I'll give all of you a few moments. This is a photo of a raptor that you probably have seen over the course of your time bird watching. And curious, any thoughts as of what this bird is? Give you a few moments. This photo was taken at Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory here in Duluth, and I purposely desaturated everything so that it focuses, or so it encourages you to focus on field marks rather than apparent color. Because field marks can be important with identifying raptors. When we go to the next slide, you realize that this is a red-tailed hawk. Now, part of the reason why I like to start off showing this slide in particular is that not all red-tailed hawks have red tails. In the world of red-tailed hawks, juveniles actually have, it's more of a light brown and kind of gray banded tail with horizontal bars, not showing a glowing red tail like the classic adults are known for. Also, red-tailed hawks have common features throughout their underside, which can be a good field mark to look for, good field marks to look for, like a belly band, which you can see on this bird. Red-tailed hawks also have shoulder patches called patagial marks and wrist commas. So if you imagine a red-tailed hawk right here wearing a watch, this little crescent of dark feathers right here, patagial mark, wrist comma, and belly band, those are good features to look for with red-tailed hawks, okay? We'll keep it simple and give you a few pointers on a species by species basis. So having participated in hawk watches over the years, and I do have to say too, you know, I do love all birds. I'm grateful for the travel experiences I've had over the years, but there's just something about hawk watching that kind of hits that zenful happy spot in my heart. And these are some of the things that I've kind of made note of over the years while participating in hawk counts. First of all, when you're looking at raptors, ignore what you think of as size. Size can oftentimes go against learning raptors on a special level. Okay, if a bird is very far away, it's going to appear smaller than it is up close. Simple physics. Very importantly, number two, focus on proportions. And when I say this, I mean you can describe nearly any bird without using terms of size. So for example, there's a peregrine falcon above, merlin below, which you see on the right side of the screen, taken in the very same moment actually over in Cape May, New Jersey. Peregrine falcons, they're a little larger headed, thicker winged, thicker handed, lengthier tailed. Peregrine falcons are basically a beefier version overall compared to the more petite merlin, okay? Field marks, number three, like I said earlier, field marks are important for identifying raptors, but kind of like with size, field marks are relative. So if you're viewing a bird that's very, very far away, you may not be able to see that belly band. That's where it's good to look for structural differences, shape and profile, rather than exclusively field marks. Looking at behavior can be another clue. We'll talk about this more as the presentation goes on. Some raptors are quite fluttery. Some raptors are very slow with the wing beats. Larger raptors tend to make larger circles when they're up in the air. Smaller raptors, when they're soaring, tend to make smaller circles. So you can kind of get a sense of raptor ID simply by how the bird behaves up in the air. Then number five, habitat. is a good clue for learning these various birds, but this is kind of relative with migration. So every raptor is unique, and depending on the raptor, some raptors experience maturity at a very early age, whereas some bald eagles, shown here, experience about 5 full years until they reach their adult plumage, shown on the right. The bird on the left is about 2 years of age. And before we go into species, we'll talk about how the wings are held. Some raptors have a dihedral with a V shape in the wing, like you see in the upper right where the turkey vulture is. You got golden eagles on the upper left, kind of a rarity for much of Minnesota, but there's populations that overwinter in south central Minnesota. We've actually been seeing a fair number of them coming through here in Duluth at the spring watch here in town. They have wings just slightly above horizontal, just slightly. Bald eagles in the bottom right, very, very planar level wings, almost like a plank of wood in some regards. And then osprey in the bottom right have very, very hunched wings, or bowed wings, as some people call them. This bird in particular is one of my favorite raptors, although I guess I could say favorite about all of them. And this is a northern harrier, and they have very distinct wing beats. And my first year of working at Hawk Ridge, I was kind of in the learning mode of, you know, I'm experiencing these raptors, some of which for the first time, and I was trying to make sense of what makes each raptor this raptor. And so I'm going to back up from my stool for a moment. I'm going to flap like a northern harrier for you. So if I'm a northern harrier flying by, watch my wing beats for a moment. Northern harriers flap as if they bounce basketballs with their wingtips, okay? So look at the cadence. They slap down and they bring the wings up slow. So if you see this very, very buoyant motion of quick with the downbeat, slow with the upbeat, as if they're bouncing basketballs with the wingtips, that's unique to northern harriers. From the silhouette alone on this photo, this is also a northern harrier. Very elongated underbelly, lengthy tail, pretty long-handed profile, or long primaries as well. Very, very sleek, beautiful raptor that these harriers are. And regardless of age or gender, all northern harriers will show a bold white rump patch. So this is a good feature to look for, regardless if you see juvenile adults or male or female. Okay. Northern harriers also used to be called marsh hawks, which, like you've seen in the picture, and for those that have had the great fortune of seeing these beautiful northern harriers in the right area, in the right fields, they're definitely a bird of the marshes and the prairies. Here's a juvenile northern harrier, beautiful ochre coloration through the underparts. This photo was taken over Park Point, my very first fall of working at Hawk Ridge. I woke up extra early. We had a nice migration coming through, and this northern harrier was flying by in the early morning light. It was such a special experience to see this bird migrating along Lake Superior. But getting to the point though, once again, notice lengthy tail, lengthy long wings, lengthy wing tips. Everything about a northern harrier is elongated. Here's an adult male, sometimes called a gray ghost, because they're silvery white below, kind of a gunmetal gray on the backside. Really beautiful complexion of silver and white as they flap with their bouncing basketball wingtips. Also, it does have the white rump patch, like I mentioned. Next, we'll go to the accipiters. Accipiter means true hawk, sometimes hawk of the woods. And there's 3 accipiter species in North America. On the left is a northern goshawk. In the middle is a Cooper's hawk, and on the right is a sharpshin hawk, shown in sequential order of size. This is a pretty rare experience to witness not just one northern goshawk, but a northern goshawk next to a Cooper's hawk next to a sharpshin hawk. For those looking to experience raptor migration on a special level, highly recommend visiting, especially within Minnesota. There's the West Skyland Hawk Count that I'm participating in with Frank Nicoletti this spring here on the west side of Duluth. And on an even larger magnitude of migration, there's Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory in the northeast side of Duluth, averaging sometimes 40, 50, 60, 70,000 raptors in a single fall. It's just amazing. Also highlighting it's the largest concentration of northern goshawk in North America. So it's a very special spectacle to see this large northern goshawk on the left. We'll start off with the smaller birds, okay? So we'll start off with the sharpshin hawk. Sharpshin hawks you may see in your backyards, especially if you have some evergreens. They can be quite widespread as far as their breeding goes, but they do have a southbound migration for the fall. Main thing to look for with sharpshin hawks, they are tiny headed. They are fairly round wing, and the tail comes to a fairly abrupt stop. Okay. They also show very little, if any, white at the end of their tail. Being as small as they are, sharp-shinned hawks tend to have a very fluttery set of wing beats. So flap, 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 glide, flap, 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 glide. Bursts of flaps and glides is a common feature to look for when seeing sharp-shinned hawks flying by. You can see from the photos, especially the two on the right now, the adult in the upper right, the juvenile in the bottom right, you can see how the tail is quite angular at the base of the tail. That's a good feature to look for with sharp-shinned hawks. Next, we'll talk about Cooper's hawks. This is the middle-sized accipiter species, and they're uncommon, but they are found throughout the Northwoods. They're even far more common as you get into central and southern Minnesota, more in the metropolitan areas where they have a wider variety of food and are more commonly found at that latitude too. So Cooper's hawks are, like I said, the mid-sized accipiter, quite okay with being in people's backyards. On the left, you can see the juvenile Cooper's hawk, very separated streaks through the front. Same thing with the upper right photo, very separated streaks. It's almost like disconnected teardrops going down the front side of the bird. Sharp-shinned hawks, on the other end, look like you took paintbrushes and kind of scrawled them through very densely interconnected zigzags of brown going through the front with the sharp-shinned hawk, okay? More separated streaks on the Cooper's hawk. They're also larger headed look than a sharp-shinned hawk. Wings come straighter out, as you can see in the bottom right picture. And the tail is a little more bulbous, or a little more round at the end. Here's another photo of a Cooper's hawk flying by. Quite powerful, flying by with some tree swallows and barn swallow. And northern goshawk, the big bomber of the accipiters. On the left, there is an adult northern goshawk. On the far left side, just to its backside, is a juvenile northern goshawk showing kind of a golden blush, which is actually a field mark to look for among its streaks on the front. And then on the right is an adult northern goshawk flying by Hawk Ridge. Beautiful silvery complexion. These next set of photos regarding northern goshawk being as large and typically as uncommon as they are, northern goshawk do occasionally come out in the open, especially when they're migrating. You know, they have to get up in the air, moving through. And I'll say it again, Hawk Ridge is a great place to experience them. With the photo on the left, this is my good friend Arthur Nelson from Cape May, New Jersey, who actually banded out there a very rare northern goshawk. They're quite scarce out there. And just showing the overall dimensions of this bird, you can see big shouldered, big tail. Everything about a northern goshawk is beefy and chunky. They are in charge. They also have a white supercilium, which is the eyebrow stripe up here. All northern goshawk, regardless of age or gender, should show a white supercilium. The features to look for with the northern goshawk. And there are so many things to go through with a 20-25 minute talk like this about raptors, kind of like Laura's wonderful presentation with warblers too. And keeping it simple, when learning accipiters in particular, don't fret if you feel stressed or if there's too many things to follow. That's normal. And that's where spending time with other people who enjoy hawk watches or simply being up at the hawk watches is a great way to learn these birds. Shown here among two photos is a sharp-shinned hawk on the left, Cooper's hawk in the middle, and the even beefier northern goshawk on the right. A little thicker profile, thicker base of the tail, scrawly, zigzaggy stripes through the tail, northern goshawk on the right. So just, once again, ignore size in this case and look at structure and proportions. That can be a good clue for learning raptors in flight. Next, we'll talk about booty owls. So we got the red-tailed hawk in the upper left, Swainson's hawk in the upper right, broadwing hawk in the bottom left, red-shouldered hawk in the bottom center, and a gorgeous from the Arctic rough-legged hawk in the bottom right. A red-tailed hawk, like I said, quite widespread overall. They are found from coast to coast. And also, as mentioned earlier, not all red-tailed hawks have red tails. So shown on the left is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. Notice what you see, maybe notice what you don't see. As far as field marks go, still has patagial mark, wrist comma, and the belly band through the front. On the right, you see a red-tailed hawk in full adult plumage as seen earlier. And red-tailed hawks, by some birders, sometimes get an underappreciated kind of rap about them. I think they're fabulous as all can be, partially because they're not only easily viewable in many cases because of how widespread they are, but also that they come in so many different color varieties, which are so beautiful. Upper left, you see a Western race red-tailed hawk, likely dark morph, red-tailed hawk overall, dark chocolate complexion through the underbelly. Upper right is a Kreider's red-tailed hawk coming from the prairie potholes of like North Dakota, South Dakota, Central Canada, frosty white below, barely a tail band. Bottom left bird is called a Beta Cola, which is a Canadian variety of red-tailed hawk. Really intense, high saturated underbelly, very stark markings. Then in the bottom right is a photo taken from Hawk Ridge, but it's actually a red-tailed hawk variety that lives in Alaska and northwestern Canada where they breed. This is called a Harlan's red-tailed hawk. So again, if you're looking to get more into raptors, study the common ones and enjoy red-tailed hawks. And you might be surprised, especially with red-tailed hawks, how many different varieties there are. Next, we got a sassy broad-winged hawk. Broad-winged hawks, they have quite a bit of attitude for a little raptor. They're known for sorry, I got dry lips on this wintry day that we're having. So broad-winged hawks, two high-pitched little whistles. They give them quite regularly when they're in flight and also when they're in the woods. Broad-winged hawks, fairly small buteo species. This is a smaller cousin of the red-tailed hawk. Angular wings, okay? So the trailing edge of the wing or the hind edge of the wing comes out from the hips and then tapers up to the front, as you can see with the photo on the left. They are quite pointy winged, stout tailed, all things considered. They're a very compact buteo, all things considered. Not nearly as sail winged or massive winged, and not as long tailed as a red-tailed hawk is. So just a little more adult broad-winged hawk on the left, two juvenile broad-winged hawks on the right. Just look at that angular profile. And ignoring size, you'll see that the wings are long, but they're not eagle-like or they're not red-tailed-like, if that makes sense. Next, we'll talk about red-shouldered hawks. Another fabulous species. I believe there's been 2 seen at the West Skyline Hawk Count here in Duluth this spring. And we're at the absolute northern cusp of them where they kind of show up as rarities here in Duluth. They're more of a central and southern Minnesota, kind of western Minnesota species too. More riparian areas is what they favor. And so as you get more into this extreme northeastern part of the state where the boreal forest is, you tend not to see many, if any, red-shouldered hawks. Both of the birds shown here are adult red-shouldered hawks. Beautiful red chest, red shoulders, which they get the name for. They're an absolutely striking bird. And I think they know it too. Absolutely beautiful. On the left, we got an adult red-shouldered hawk. On the right, you're going to see a juvenile red-shouldered hawk. Now here's keeping it simple for you. So they're a little bit like a red-tailed hawk as far as the thickness of the wings. They are a little more slender wing, but it's kind of relative. Good feature to look for, though, is all red-shouldered hawks, regardless of age or gender, have little crescents that line their watch area once again. So we were talking about how the red-tailed hawks have those little pale wrist commas right here. Similar area, but a little more elongated, are these very transparent whitish areas in the outer parts of the wings. And for comparison, this is a photo from Cape May. You can see a broad-winged hawk and red-shouldered hawk riding a thermal together. And this is where ignore size, just kind of stand back for a second and soak up. You got the little pale accents of white in the wings, a little deeper winged, longer tailed profile in the red-shouldered hawk. Broad-winged hawks are a little more angular, a little more slender, pointier winged overall. I just said that without ever talking about big or small, okay? Rough-legged hawks, another fabulous raptor species from the Arctic. Oh, they're so pretty. Rough-legged hawks come in a variety of different morphs. There's light morphs on the right, dark morphs on the left, and believe it or not, there's even some intermediate morphs. We're not going to get into that today. But basically, rough-legged hawks, they breed in the Arctic tundra. They come down here for the winter months. So they're a very beautiful raptor species, and typically actually kind of went through it a little fast. The photo on the left, you can see that this bird is attempting to perch on the tippy tops of trees. They love the tippy tops of trees, and I suspect that it may be because where they come from the land of near treeless expanses. Basically, they're a cliff nesting bird in most cases. And so when they come down here, they tend to not be found on big, thick branches like red-tailed hawks, but they prefer skinny little wispy branches to perch and overlook the fields that they go after. Next, we have Swainson's hawk. This is going to be a pretty much a summer-only bird from Minnesota, and it's primarily the western tier of Minnesota, where you have large, vast prairies where the species does occur. Definitely not part of the boreal forest for breeding. And they're a relative, being a booty, they're a relative of the broad-winged hawks, the red-tailed hawks, and so on. But they're very extra long and slender winged with very two-toned underwings. Okay, so juvenile on the left, adult Swainson's hawk on the right. Very two-toned underwings, very, very lengthy, graceful wings. Osprey, gotta love the osprey. Osprey are fabulous birds. They are eagle-like in profile with the wings. They have little dark carpal patches in the middle of the wing. Carpal means wrist. And they go after lots of fish and occasionally lamprey, as seen on the left. Here's some juvenile osprey. Looking at the time, we're doing all right. Juvenile osprey in both photos, little golden freckles lining the edges of the feathers throughout the wing. Really striking bird. Black mass through the eye helps reduce glare, as they are found around water their entire lives. Here's a bald eagle, adult bald eagle, thinking, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that Bruhnke's covering. We got a few more species to go before we wrap up, but we're getting there. So we got adult bald eagle. Shown here on the left is an adult bald eagle. They've made an incredible recovery as a result of eliminating DDT. Really, people, it is about what we don't do in our environment that can oftentimes make the biggest difference. Also, on a little plug, I'm all for responsible, outdoor activities and all. But if you happen to be a hunter or a fisherman, ridding your supply and tools of lead is going to be in the best interest of bald eagles and so many other animals. Loons are going to help too if you happen to choose shot or fishing or fishing items that don't contain lead. Okay, so we need to get lead out of the environment. On the right is a beautiful immature bald eagle as well, kind of going through some rough molt right now as it ages. Golden eagles, like I said, they're kind of a rarity for up here, but they do show up every year in small numbers. We have a variety of golden eagles shown here. There's adult in the bottom left, upper left, and there's also juvenile in the bottom right. So you can see some nice profiles of the golden eagles. They look like a bald eagle, but you scrunch the head, made the tail a little longer. That's golden eagle profile. The wings also taper into the hips just a little more too. And falcons. So there's three main species of falcons found throughout Minnesota as common falcons. There's American kestrel on the left, merlin on the right. Kestrels in general are a little frosty or a little paler overall. Merlin are densely streaked with dark complexion. See that a little more. You see if you happen to see a small falcon flying by, and if it's got a pale belly with very, very pale underwings as it flies with banana peel-like wing beats, very slappy wing beats, that's kestrel. If you see a very dark, compact falcon flying like it's late for a date with very hurried wing beats, that's merlin. But very fast. Very fast. American kestrel on the left, merlin on the right. Getting towards the last one, we got peregrine falcons. Peregrine falcons, juvenile on the left, adult on the right. Juveniles have vertical streaks through their front sides. Adults have horizontal barring that goes laterally across their chests. Juveniles overall tend to be very brown toned overall, like you see on the left. The adult peregrine falcons are seen like on the right, very, very slate colored, slate winged, slate hooded. Here's a peregrine falcon migrating by Hawk Ridge. Very, very lengthy wings overall. Okay, so peregrine falcon, basically a supersized falcon, more pronounced, very, very fluid wing beats through the wingtips. Again, peregrine falcons, if you want to see them and looking around local water towers in the summer can be a good spot for them. But even visiting, local hawk watches like Hawk Ridge and the West Skyland Hawk Hunt can be a great place to experience them when they're in the right season. And lastly, we'll get to, it's basically a raptor. They have underdeveloped feet, which makes them slightly a non-raptor, but I think that they're a beautiful bird to be kept with our raptor talk today. And turkey vultures, they help keep our roads clean. Okay, so they help keep our roads clean. So they have barren heads that kind of go up to roadkill, dead things throughout the woods. Amazing sense of smell, unlike most raptors that lack that efficient sense of smell. And turkey vultures, like I said, have the V shape in the wings. So they're an incredible bird, and it's always a treat to see them when they're coming through. And really looking forward to seeing them in the months to come. And just a little shout out again. Thank you all for being here today. For my close-up slide, I just would like to do a few little mentionings. Definitely make a visit to Hawk Ridge in the upper left. Become a member of the MOU, Minnesota Ornithologists Union. Humana in the upper right is one of the organizations that runs a lot of nationwide hawk counting data. Great organization if you want to get involved with hawk counts. Hawkwatch International in the bottom left. I was fortunate to count raptors in Corpus Christi, working for Hawkwatch International, and they've done a tremendous amount of outreach with just overall raptor conservation. Cape May, New Jersey, special shout out because many of these photos actually came from Cape May, New Jersey too, so it's a great place for hawk watching. Drink your bird-friendly coffee; it does make a difference. And if you make your yard more filled with native plantings, you are making a difference for all the birds that are migrating through, songbirds and raptors alike. So again, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Eric, so much. Are there any questions? Maybe as people are writing in their questions, I'll share this. There are 2 turkey vultures were preparing to migrate north for the summer, but after talking about it, they decided they were too old to go all that way, so they decided to take a plane. When they were about to board the aircraft, the flight attendant, noticing that both vultures were carrying a dead armadillo, asked, "Would you like to check those armadillos through as luggage?" "No, thanks," one of the vultures replied. "They're carry-on." So are there any questions for Eric? Eric, do you have your email? Howard is asking for your email address.
Oh yeah, it was on my last slide, but it looks like here I'll type it in here for folks to see. As I think there may be a wrap-up slide for the MOU talks possibly. Should be. Oh,
there we go.
Eric, you can post your slide again.
Sure thing. One moment while I do a share screen. Thanks for your patience. All right, can everyone see this now?
Yes.
All right, yeah, upper right corner, bird feeder, spelled a little differently, birdfeeder@gmail.com. And I'd be more than happy to, if you have raptor questions or otherwise, I'd be happy to connect with all of you. And all are welcome, of course, to come up for the spring migration up here too. It's a really special place to see a lot of raptors.
Yeah, thank you. Dick, do you have any last words of wisdom?
No, I want to thank all the presenters, and I want to thank everybody who has stayed with us the whole time. We closed with 190 something people still attached, a computer still attached. So that's just an amazing turnout. Our participation throughout the whole morning has been wonderful. And I think it's a representation of how exciting birding can be and the kinds of things that the MOU can help you enjoy in your life. So thanks, everybody.
On behalf of the MOU, if you're not a member, please consider becoming a member. I want to thank you for joining us today. It was a great morning. If you're like me, and geez, I hope you're not, you're all pumped to get out and do some great birding. So thanks, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you next year.